This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. How much of it is instinctive, do you think? How much of it is instinctive? So when you are being invited by our friends in the media, myself included, potentially, of course, when you're being invited to feel sorry for parents who may struggle to find the money needed to pay VAT on school fees, where do your instincts take you? And then when you're being invited 24 hours later to feel sorry for people in receipt of disability benefits who are facing a reduction in their support, a reduction in their income, do you have a completely different response? Where do your instincts lie? Genuine question. I don't think we could get a phoning out of why our instincts lean in those directions. I suspect that the story about private education has been horrifically skewed in the British media precisely. Well, actually, do you know what? I bet not many people working for newspapers can afford to send their children to private school anymore, but the absolute head honchos will be able to, the absolute sort of editors and above. And there's this perception, because most of us, of course, with senior positions in the media went to private schools, so there's a perception that protection is necessary. But I bet it doesn't land with the British public. I can't remember the last polling that I saw, but there's no earthly way that people who are struggling to pay their food bills every month are going to be sparing much of a thought for people who, it turned out yesterday, are not taking their children out of private school. Should we start a clock? Should we start a little countdown to keep an eye on all the columnists and commentators who couldn't shut up about VAT on private schools for much of last year and indeed this year, and whether or not they're going to return to the story? Now it's emerged that next to no children have actually left the private sector to move into the state sector. That's not an opinion, that's counting. Should we start a little clock on that, see if there's going to be any sort of form of apology or reverse? Still waiting for the same people to apologise for Brexit and Donald Trump. So whether or not they're going to do a reverse ferret on the private education story is, I think you'll allow me to suggest, unlikely. So my instincts, you won't be surprised to learn, go in the direction of protecting people that aren't me. I don't think people like me, who can afford to send our children to private schools, need help from the government. We certainly don't need charitable status to be applied to the schools that our children go to in order to somehow benefit us even further in a desperately unequal society. And again, my instincts lean towards the most vulnerable in society, and perhaps naively, my presumption has always been that people in receipt of disability payments in particular will be our most vulnerable. Addressing a private meeting of Labour MPs last night, Keir Starmer said he would take tough decisions to cut the bill for working age health and disability benefits. Now that is a phrase that will strike a chill into hearts up and down the country, isn't it? People who, and again, perhaps naively, but I truly don't think so, people who are already struggling are being told that the struggle is not only real, but it's about to get measurably worse. A £3 billion cut over the next 3 years. Billions more expected to be announced later in the week. Quite probably a freeze on the personal independence payment till 2026, which would cost... You see, and then I say it'll cost some claimants more than £350 a year. And here is the heart of the problem. Here is the heart of the problem. For many people, particularly the kind of people persuaded that farmers need protecting from inheritance tax or that private school parents need protecting from VAT, they're not going to be able to conceive of a world in which £350 a year is a meaningful sum of money. They're genuinely not. What do you mean £350? That's why they say really stupid things like, why don't you just cancel your Netflix? Or why don't you eat fewer avocados? They have absolutely no concept of running out of money before you've run out of month. I mean, I barely do. I rely on you to tell me what it's like, and I hope a degree of empathy. But when you hear people denying that poverty exists, I mean, actively claiming that poverty doesn't exist, that if people are truly running out of money, then they must be spending it all on fags and beer. They are displaying an ignorance coupled with a callousness that is both deliberate and deceitful. And then you come back to the numbers, and then you come back to the inflation in recent years of these numbers, which is stunning. £13 billion increase between 2020 and 2024. That is, it was at 25. I beg your pardon. It was at 35 billion, the overall bill, and it is now at 48 billion. So that's an increase of 13 billion in the space of 3 to 4 years. And if things carry on like that, the bill will be 70 billion. Now, as a top-rate taxpayer, I'm happy to pay tax to help people who need help. Keir Starmer is suggesting this morning that some of these people need a different kind of help or don't need help at all. Or rather, if not this morning, then the suggestion is coming. And who do we turn to know? How do we know whether or not there is any room for saving, any room for cuts? They've pledged not to put taxes up. And, a lot of the stuff that they promised to do, they've subsequently retreated from on the grounds that the facts have changed. The world has changed. But promising to put taxes up is still in this country, whether we like it or not, a form of electoral suicide. It doesn't matter how many people we are in need of support. Telling the average Joe, and this isn't an insult or it's not judgmental, telling the average Joe that he or she is going to have to pay for people who are vulnerable is a really, really tricky ticket to sell. I think, didn't Nick have some calls this morning from people who are furious about the idea of folk who are living near electricity pylons getting 50 quid or something? Why should I be paying for that? It is a wonderful appetite to feed if you're so minded. Selfishness coupled with self-interest, actually, is probably a kinder word to say. Self-interest is an incredibly powerful drug. Some people will never be weaned off it, but you can't have a fully functioning society unless you are capable, or enough people are capable, of pausing self-interest. So I know that poverty exists. I know that it is most likely to be in place in homes where work is impossible or very, very hard. But I also think that there is a sense of gravity to some of these numbers, particularly this massive increase in the amount of money being spent. And the belief that benefits are too easily claimed by young people with mild mental illness. So I think those are the 2 or 3 avenues into this that we will take this morning. The first is, in the context of invisible health conditions, okay, so obviously if you are severely disabled, then the idea that you could just pull your socks up and go out and do a few shifts is absurd. So I'm not talking about you today, although I am conscious that you will be very worried by the rhetoric of reduction in the support that you receive, and we will return to your cases and your interests at a later date. But the idea that everybody, or the idea that there are billions and billions of pounds being unfairly claimed, well, that's why I opened the programme this morning with a question about instincts. It's an instinct question, isn't it? Do you believe that there are billions and billions of pounds being illegally or dishonestly claimed? None of the statistics support it. The figures for fraud are close to negligible, and it may be that there's loads and loads of undetected fraud out there, but it seems unlikely. So my instincts tell me that these are not paths you go down because you think life is going to be a bed of roses. But my instincts could be wrong. And the only thing that gives me pause is this huge increase in disability benefits, the ones that are not means tested and not linked to employment status. They're meant to help the recipient with the extra daily costs of disability. You can get between £1,500 and just shy of £10,000 a year, depending on the assessed level of disability. So I would cautiously suggest that nobody with very, very visible disabilities is going to be or rather nobody with invisible disabilities is going to be at the upper end of that market. Again, £1,500 a year to the kind of people whining about inheritance tax for farmers and VAT on school fees. They're not going to even notice £1,500 a year being added to or taken away from their annual spending power. They're genuinely not going to notice. And this is where I worry that commentary is dictated in this country by people who are as financially comfortable as I am. That these conversations are had by politicians and pundits, commentators and columnists who will truly not notice 1,500 quid less or 1,500 quid more in their incomings and outgoings at the end of the year. It's Mr. McCorber territory again, isn't it? It's the idea that if you're one penny over your income, result misery, and if you're one penny under your income, result happiness. And it doesn't matter what your income is, that's true. But if the figures being bandied around are somehow fueling your conviction that people claiming to be in trouble, people claiming to be vulnerable, are all swinging the lead, are all taking the mickey. You know someone who knows someone whose window cleaner went out with someone who used to be married to someone who claims this, that and the other. I just don't know quite what we're supposed to make of it when it's the Labour Party leading us into this territory. The government is concerned that the recent growth in the bill for these benefits, which rose by nearly £13 billion to £48 billion between 2019-20 and 2023-24, is unsustainable. I don't think it's easy to claim if you're a young person with mild mental illness. So that's my first question. Because when things get written up as a culture war row with right-wing politicians and media claiming the benefits are too easily claimed by young people with mild mental illness, right? That absolutely chills me to the core, that kind of journalism. And this is in The Guardian. Because that looks to me like the kind of false equivalence that has paved the path of Donald Trump into the White House. As if the story, or as if the job of a journalist is not to report the facts. The Guardian has written up this story on its front page without actually analysing whether or not it is easy for young people to claim benefits for mild mental illness. They haven't actually looked into it. They've just said there are some people on the right. And remember, these are the same people who told you austerity was both good and necessary, that Liz Truss would be a brilliant economic guru, that Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy who could be trusted with the safety of the country at a time of immeasurable peril, that Brexit would be a brilliant idea, that Donald Trump would be a genius and the best thing since sliced bread for British interest. These are the same people who are claiming that benefits are too easily claimed by young people with mild mental illness. But we're so bent now that it gets reported as a bit like we used to do climate change. Here's 99% of the world's scientists all claiming or proving one thing. Here's some idiot with a column in the Daily Telegraph claiming the opposite, and we're going to treat them like equal and opposite forces. We're going to give them 50-50. So I don't know, but you do. How hard or easy is it for a young person with mild mental illness to claim benefits? That's question number one. How hard or easy is it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I don't think we can answer the question of why this has risen by £13 billion in such a short period of time. But I think we can answer the question of, or we can define the difference between can't and won't. So in the context of invisible disability, what is the difference between can't work and won't work? We've done this question recently with schools, with the huge number of children who aren't going to school. I think it's the same question. Do you? I think it's the same subject. I think there's this cohort of fellow humans who are going through stuff that the rest of us don't recognise and either choose not to believe or choose to believe. And it hinges on the distinction between can't and won't. You've got a child in bed telling you that they can't go to school. As a parent, you think it's won't. You think there's nothing physically wrong with you. All right, you're feeling a bit blue. You're feeling a bit under the weather. You can go. And I know if you do go, if I push you out the door, I know you'll be all right in half an hour. I'll get a message from you on the bus saying, oh, I'm all right now. But pushing you out the door is hard because I also love you. And now imagine it's an adult. It's like, I can't leave the house. I can't hold down a job. I can't commit to these hours. I can't commit to these shifts. And because I love you, I think my job is to persuade you that you can. My job is to talk you into doing it. My job is to say, of course you can. Just give it one last push. Come on. You can do this. Little bit of stick, little bit of carrot. And I don't know what the difference is between can't and won't. And I don't want you to hate me, but when I look at these numbers, I can't help thinking there is probably some can't in there and some won't. There is probably some won't in there, because if there isn't, then this is horrific. Absolutely horrific. To take people who are already in agony, mental agony, and add to their burdens. So, what's the difference between can't and won't? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Okay? And there will be, we'll all know someone who knows someone. I'm not suggesting these stories don't exist, who seem to be swinging the lead. But that's what worries me most about the way The Guardian have reported this story. I watched a play last night called Punch. It's absolutely brilliant. It's by James Graham, who you've met on this programme and on the Full Disclosure podcast. And speaking of Full Disclosure, Julie Hesmanhouch is in it. It's about that lad Jacob, who you met last week on Wednesday, I think, who killed someone. He killed a man called James, whose mum's called Joan, actually, which resonated a bit with me for obvious reasons, with one punch, a single punch. It was the impact of the head on the pavement that actually killed him, but it was the punch that set that chain of medical events in motion. And it is a piece of extraordinary theatre. But what James Graham does throughout is draw these problems back to society, back to cuts and back to austerity. Makes cases that if there hadn't been so many cuts, there wouldn't be so much crime. If there hadn't been so many cuts, there wouldn't be so much poverty. If there hadn't been so many cuts, there wouldn't be so many untreated mental health problems running around our society. And I'm thinking of that this morning. It's on at the New Vic. No, the Young Vic. It's on at the Young Vic, by the way, near Waterloo in London. And I don't imagine it's easy to get a ticket because it's so flipping good. But if you can get one, then grab it now. So, 20 minutes after 10. What's going on? What's the difference between can't and won't? And how easy is it for a young person with, quote, mild mental illness to claim benefits? Because even The Guardian tells me that right-wing politicians and media are claiming that it's too easy, without mentioning that they're exactly the same people who also claimed, well, you know the litany now of things that they have been horrifically and horribly wrong about, to the detriment of everybody except them.
James O'Brien on LBC.
23 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We are mapping once again the difference between can't and won't, but not in the context of children who are not going to school, in the context of adults who are not working. I think almost certainly for the same reasons, almost all of which I think will be real, will be genuine. But you can turn a can't into a can, can't you? With the right work, with the right support, the right help, and taking money out of this sector doesn't seem to me to be a particularly uplifting prospect when it comes to improving the lot of the people in this hole. Daniel is in Nottingham, which is appropriate enough, where that play I was just talking about is set. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Well, this is very, very scary indeed. My first time calling through, and I won't do the usual thing and say how much of a big fan I am, because I'm sure you know.
But you just did.
Wonderful fans you have.
But you just did.
Oh, I take it all back.
Well, I won't do the usual thing I do of saying, "Don't worry, mate, it's only me."
Cool. So I just want to speak briefly, if I may, about my little sister.
Yeah.
Who? So obviously, this comes from a place of deep and heartfelt love. She hasn't seen her dad since she was very little, so I have a sort of a quasi-parental relationship with her. She was a school refuser for a long time. She doesn't have any GCSEs, and she's in receipt of various different benefits and stuff. So the place of love that this comes from, I know that what she's feeling and what she's experiencing is legitimate.
Yeah.
And I do listen to her, and my fiancé and I both have a great relationship with her. But the encouragement that we want to offer and show her all the time is that if at 18 now, if it continues that she doesn't have a job, or indeed volunteering or doing anything like that, it's only going to get harder. And the place of love that this comes from is, I desperately don't want her to just settle into this thing of, I can't do it and I'm never going to do it, and that's just my life now.
Yeah, and it is hard not to worry that is because the support isn't there and hasn't been there since, well, austerity kicked in, I suppose. The worry we have when we look at these statistics is that quite a lot of people have already gone down that path.
That's it. And so, I hope it's obvious. I will stop at nothing. Me and my family will stop at nothing to try to encourage her, to help her, again, be it voluntary work or any sort of support.
Just breaking the cycle of inactivity.
Absolutely. And so the thing I mentioned to your lovely producer was this concept that I've got of I call it the righteous pint.
Go on.
At the end of a really hard day's work, when you've overcome some challenges and you thought you couldn't do it and you did it and you can punch the air, and afterwards you can go to the pub with a couple of mates and you sit down and you have a righteous pint and you go, I've earned that. And I've told it tastes so much sweeter.
Oh, I love that. Is that your own? Did you come up with that yourself?
I think it might have been from a podcast. I can't remember. Let's say it's my own. Yeah,
just claim it, mate. Take the W. That's beautiful, actually. It sounds like something Terry Pratchett might have come up with. And of course, it doesn't have to be alcohol. It'd be just that thing when you've done something that you didn't think you could do. That's what I was trying to convey. You've done it better than I did when I talked about the child on the bus saying, God, guess what? I could get out the house today. I could do it.
And exactly. And that's not to say that the things that she's feeling, the fears that she's experiencing are not true. I know that they are, but I know that they're not going to last forever. And the only way to overcome that is to challenge your fears. And I hope that
to put your head in the, I don't want to say the lion's mouth because we're overdosing on analogies at the moment, but it is doing that thing which seems impossible. And how do we know the difference then? And a few people are saying if we don't know the difference, how the heck is the government going to tell the difference? Joe puts it very starkly. How the hell are the government going to be able to tell? How do we know? I mean, where's the line between the things that you can help her with, the things that could push her into a place where she's doing more, and the point where that would become bullying and become counterproductive? We don't know, do we?
Another thing I was going to say, James, if I may, is I've also said to her that if you try something, it doesn't have to be the exact right thing for you. If you just do a course, I've said to her, and I'll help pay for it. I haven't got much money, but as a family, as a team, we'll support her. Yes. If it's bricklaying and you try it and you go, do you know what, I didn't like that. Okay, that's fine. What about hairdressing? I didn't like that, but if you give it a go. It's better than doing nothing.
And that's the thing. I can tell from your voice you share, and you're talking about someone you love. I luckily am not, but you have that bafflement at that inactive, that doing nothing, because it flies in the face of where the thing like the righteous pint takes us psychologically. We presume it's self-evident if you do that, if you push. But what if 99.9% of people in these spaces are can't, not won't? What if we're all suffering now from another form of normality bias? We're just presuming because of how we're built. What if human wiring has changed for a couple of generations as a consequence of lockdowns coupled with long COVID? Still a massively underestimated and misunderstood phenomenon. Growing in understanding, growing in acknowledgement, but nowhere near fast enough to help people whose lives have been absolutely stymied by it. And how does it reach your ears when you learn that a government, and I will add a Labour government, is planning to make relatively huge cuts to a system which I generally find, certainly since 2010, only people who've been wrong about everything have described as overgenerous. And I'll say that again because I think it's really important, and you're not going to hear it in many other places. Even Andrew Blinking Neil writing a column for the Daily Mail on Saturday about how catastrophically wrong he'd been about Donald Trump. Apparently it's the event of the last 7 days that have made it clear what a weapon Trump is. If only there'd been a little bit of a clue before that, eh? But all of the people who describe this system as overgenerous have been wrong about everything for all of their professional lives. You're welcome to make a suggestion of an exception, but I can't think of one. And before you go, Daniel, a lot of people crediting you for being a fantastic big brother, but I know that you are only doing what you think anyone else would do in the same circumstances. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33. So let me just run you through the reasoning of the government. Because, as I've said, instinctively, when they say we're coming after disability benefits, I feel my hackles rise and my fists come up. I don't know why. It might make me pathetic and naive, but I can live with that. So the design of incapacity benefits means that ill and disabled claimants many of whom want to work, or if you're writing it for The Guardian today, many of whom say they want to work, are incentivized not to consider work and are cut off from meaningful job support. So if you are assessed as having limited capability for work-related activity, you get £5,000 a year on top of your standard universal credit award, and you are exempted from having to find work. Incapacity benefits are means-tested payments, mainly attached to universal credit. So if you wanted to work but you'd fallen into that category, it's easy to see why you probably wouldn't. You would probably stop wanting to work because it would have too big an impact upon the situation that you find yourself in. Disability benefits are not means-tested, and they're not linked to employment status, which means, and quite a few of you are pointing this out to me, Adam in Croydon does it best. I know this isn't exactly what you're debating, but it seems to be stemming from the argument about disability benefits and the recent government announcement for cuts. The point about the PIP benefit that is always missed in the media is that it has nothing to do with work. Exactly, I'll say it again. They are not means-tested and not linked to employment. They're meant to help every recipient with the extra daily costs of disability. So Adam says, I have bipolar disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder, and I receive PIP while managing to maintain a good job and support a young family. I use my benefit to fund regular and long-term therapy, which the NHS is unable to provide. So they give him the money and he spends it in the private sector on services that help him maintain what he's just described, a good job and a young family. It helps me maintain my conditions and plays a huge part in keeping me in a stable job and subsequently supporting my children as a functioning parent. There seems to be a misunderstanding about PIP and the effect that cuts will have on people with genuine and debilitating conditions like mine, both physical and mental. Well, we don't know if people like you will be targeted. We do know that the government so far seems to understand the distinctions that you describe, chiefly the ones between benefits that are means-tested and work-related and benefits that are not means-tested and not work-related. But once you start factoring in the right-wing politicians and media, as The Guardian describes them, claiming the benefits are too easily claimed by young people, or lying, as you might say, then the challenge that the government faces becomes clearer, because they have to legislate in the world we inhabit, not the world of facts, evidence and truth that we might like to. So how easy is it for a young person with mild mental health problems to get PIP? 0345 6060973. How easy is it for anyone to get PIP? But that seems to be the cohort most under consideration. Eloise is in Tower Hamlets. Eloise, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I'm going to apologise in advance if I get upset, because today is the first day I started panicking about this.
Okay.
I've been trying not to. We spoke a few years ago. I'm a person who used to be a universal credit work coach, and I'm now disabled.
Yes.
So I've seen it from both sides. And just before I tell you what the difference is between can't and won't, for me, I would like to say that lovely previous caller, I would actually love to be able to have a righteous pint. I really would. And it's something I've been working towards in my own way. Anyway.
I think Dan knows that. You know, Dan wasn't claiming it was easy.
I'm just saying for anyone listening. You know what I mean?
Yes.
No, he's lovely, obviously. But the can't and won't for me, very simply. Say, for example, I was to go back to my old job in the job centre, which I would have loved to do. I would probably be there an hour, and I would either, because I have something I have a disability which is called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's a genetic condition.
Right.
And I have cervical instability in my neck. If I turn my head around, if I'm talking to two people or I'm looking at a screen, looking at a person, then I become very faint. I manage it now, so I don't faint. But if I was in that position and I had to sit there and do that, I'd be on the floor within a short while. Or, for example, I have a knee which dislocates regularly. I manage it. I take very great care. I have been having intensive physio, blah, blah, blah. I was bedbound when I started 3 years ago. A whole other story. But I manage my condition. So, but still things dislocate. If I was walking around an office all day or working in a shop, which I've done before, and I would love to do, I'd love to be around people, except that's the main thing, and earning my own money and being my own,
yes,
being in charge of my own life. I would love that. I've had to come to terms with the fact that I can't do that. And I'm a very positive person. So I say, okay, I've done the work, come to terms with that. But, if my knee dislocates on the shop floor when I'm stacking shelves or behind the till and I put my foot down and my knee pops out, ambulance. Nobody's going to employ me. Fair enough. If I was to work from home, for example, won't.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I wouldn't have been able to make this phone call to you because I couldn't hold my phone because my shoulder had subluxated, which is a partial dislocation. Hurts like hell. I'm used to it. It goes away after work. Today, it's okay. Tomorrow, it might not be again. I woke up with it yesterday. That's how this disability works.
Got it.
Walking down the street, I look like I'm same age as you. I look like an ordinary, slightly round, little middle-aged lady walking down the street. Some days I'm always strapped up underneath my clothes. Right. But some days I use a stick. Some days I use crutches. They always sitting by the door, depending on the day. I have been trying. This is why I'm starting to panic today, because I've had various things going on with my health. I've had to move home to get a ground floor. I've done all that in the last few years on my own. Support from wonderful health, friends and family, but very little support from the state apart from my benefits, which I'm very grateful for.
And you get PIP, do you?
I get PIP. I've got a lifetime award of PIP because my condition is genetic.
Because it's not going away. So you're not, I suppose we should point out there are horror stories at both extremes, aren't there? So there are people who've been asked if their multiple sclerosis is going to cure itself and things like that. So sometimes these assessments can be pretty brutal, but I don't think that's the common experience. I suspect the common experience is yours.
I had to fight for it, yes. But what I always used to do was, I ended up having someone very knowledgeable in my condition, which is, knowledge of the condition is increasing now, which is great. But this person happened to be very knowledgeable, very kind and competent. But I always, whenever I was applying for these things years ago, I would say, oh, yes, I used to work in the DWP, and they'd immediately go, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. Normal people, people, but you know what I mean? Most people can't do that. But I use that to my advantage, and I don't care, because I did know the system. I do know the system.
And if you don't know the system, you're on a much stickier wicket. You're on a much steeper gradient just to get to the stuff that you're entitled to.
Exactly. And my final point, I could rant on, and I'm glad I haven't cried, because like I say, today I'm getting really panicky, and that's not me.
You're getting panicky because of the unspecified nature of the cuts that are coming, and you're worried that you will be in the firing line, and we don't know yet, which is why I was a little wary of doing this today. But it's because of you that we're doing this today, because once it starts appearing in the newspapers, and if even the Guardian are writing it up as there are two sides to every argument story, then people like you are going to be frightened.
Well, exactly. And I mean, my main thing is, over the last sort of I've had a lot going on, moving, health, In the last few months, things have calmed down for me. My house is fine, And I've started thinking, and I mean, when I say I'm sort of investigating, I'm sitting with my phone when I can hold it, with the telly on in the background, going, And I've been doing investigations and bits of research, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, which is what I can manage. What can I do? I want to work. But all of that has been based on, I will always get this PIP. It may fluctuate, but I will always get this PIP. And, my dream is, my goal, because I'm, as I say, very positive person, this is like, I want a better life for myself. I am able to, I'm lucky, but it will all be dependent on, I'm not starting at zero once I start earning, in whatever way I end up doing it. I'm not starting at zero. I've got this little cushion which will enable me to get a taxi to somewhere, right? Which will enable me to do X, which will enable me to earn a little bit less for a while if I have to.
The payments are meant to help the recipient with the extra daily costs of disability. So the things that you would need that I would not.
Exactly. And if I can't I can't go, right, swipe off all benefits, done start a job because I could, whatever I end up doing, it will only be able to be part-time. And I won't be able to afford to live.
And the question of how they are going to tell the difference is one that none of us can actually answer.
No. And this is getting, like I say, I'm one of those people, and I'm lucky that that's obviously my temperament.
Yes, but for some people it isn't. You're right. That's a very generous point, actually. I'm thinking of Dan's sister, who obviously, for reasons, some of them will be generational. We haven't even touched on social media and the impact that can have on mental health rather than physical health. We did a whole day on it on LBC yesterday, and some people seem to have already forgotten that we recognised yesterday almost unanimously that these are huge personality-changing effects on people. But here we are. I mean, fingers crossed. I mean, I know that sounds glib, that you're not going to be in the firing line, but until you know that you're not, this fear will persist. But you've helped the rest of us come to a better understanding of the issue, Eloise. I wonder how many people even know that the kind of benefits we're talking about are not means tested and not linked to employment status. If there were a job that Eloise could do with her condition, she would still be qualifying for PIP because she would still need those occasional taxis. She'd still need the things that you don't need because you haven't got the condition, because you're not disabled. It's actually theoretically, it's an incredibly civilised benefit, one that recognises the extra costs incurred by a disability in the context of being a part of society. And ideally, for almost everybody in receipt of it, I would suggest a contributing part of society. I've got time for a couple more calls if you're quick. 0345 60 The time now is 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. It's a 1992 Act that has been updated many times since that states that some of these benefits, including PIP, should rise by inflation each year. Other benefits have no such protection. Even George Osborne, who froze many benefits, kept PIP rising during his time. There was a call for a freeze, but the Treasury eventually relented. I'd be surprised if Rachel Reeves goes there, but you can't rule anything out. One commentator suggests this morning that it's possible a kite is being flown. I think the same commentator at Playbook point out some of what Keir Starmer has said recently sounds very similar to what Rishi Sunak said not long ago. 1 in 8 young people not in education, employment or training. And the people who really need that safety net still not always getting the dignity that they deserve. That's unsustainable. It's indefensible. It's unfair. People feel that in their bones. It runs contrary to those deep British values that if you can work, you should. And there the rhetoric just tries to have its cake and eat it, doesn't it? Talking about people who need help not always getting it, but also adding to the idea that a lot of the people in this category are won't rather than can't. And Rishi Sunak, only about a year ago, said, and I quote, if you can work more, you should. Keir Starmer, it runs contrary to those deep British values that if you can work, you should. Rishi Sunak, if you can work more, you should. Now, I'm not making a big zinging point here because they're both 100% correct. If you can work more, you should. But if you can't work more, you should. If you can't work more, should you get penalised? Should you get punished? Should you get targeted? If you read this, please don't say my name. I'm in receipt of the sickness element of universal credit, and this rhetoric is breaking me even now. You saying words like targeted makes me wonder how many people are feeling like I'm feeling today. When you're in a position that you can already only eat fresh food for 2 weeks out of 4 and exist on porridge for much of the rest of the time, the thought of being pushed from barely existing into genuine destitution is such a lonely and frightening place. I don't know what the answers are to this, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure at the moment that the government is poised to ask the right questions. It is unsustainable, the current increase in costs of these benefits. It is clear that the difference between can't and won't is at the very heart of all of these conversations, and the government seems at the moment to be dodging that element of the conversation. And yet Dan's sister is going to be a guiding light on this topic, someone who knows her better than we ever will, believes in his bones that with the right help and the right support, she could be out functioning in society. And at the moment, she isn't. These are the young people I've been fascinated by for the best part of, is it 2 years? Ever since the numbers first started appearing, and we haven't nailed it. Every time I've tried, I've failed. I'm not even trying today. Where are these young people? Dan's sister is not going to ring me, but Dan will. There's perhaps a little clue for the next time we try to find these young people and answer the question of why they are opting out of society. Look what I just did. Normality bias. Opting out of society. Exercise of free choice, autonomy, independence, decision. Not can't but won't. They're not opting out. What if hardly any of them are opting out? What if 99% of these people can't work rather than won't work? What then does a helpful policy look like? 10:52 is the time. Linda is in Croydon. Linda, what would you like to say?
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to go at this from two angles, actually, because I'm a parent of a young person with anxiety, and I'm also a mental health practitioner. I've been for 20 years in an acute service. And I will say, first of all, that PIP is not an easy benefit to get. It's dehumanising and it's horrible to go through the process.
I think you'll find that right-wing politicians and media claim that the benefits are too easily claimed by young people with mild mental illness, Linda.
Well, let me tell you my experience. So my son has, anxiety, as I say. He does have an EHCP, he has additional needs, but he doesn't have learning disabilities. But he does need a lot of support, and specifically with anxiety. Now, we went through the PIP process. Obviously, I had to do it for him because the form just tipped him over the edge completely. The form is like pages and pages and pages, and you have to spill every single detail, and it's horrible. It put me in an emotional state even doing the form, because it made, it's horrible. It's intrusive, and then you have to supply no end of evidence. And so we did get PIP, but I will also say, as a mental health worker as well, and with a lot of experience and working in the setting, we help people with those forms all the time, and those people have to go through either a mandatory reconsideration or a tribunal. And I actually think it's under what the amount of people that get PIP, because a lot of people are so intimidated by that process that when they get the, yes, you're not having it kind of thing, they're not going to go through the mandatory reconsideration or the tribunal. It's far too much. And another thing I wanted to say as well, which, because I feel so angry about this, is so many, we have I see quite a lot of young people actually with mental illness who, had they had services and had they had intervention years ago, they wouldn't be in this situation now. But some of these difficulties are absolutely entrenched. And these people, I don't want to call them these people, but some of the clients I see, the difficulties that they have, they could have, if life had gone a different way and they'd have had the interventions and the support that they needed years ago, then they wouldn't be in this situation now. And my worry with this is, I saw something about it the other day, and I get angry about it because, when I hear about coaches who...
You hear about what? Your phone went a bit funny then. When you hear about what?
Oh, sorry.
That's not your fault.
I just think job coaches who are, not qualified, not experienced, and a few courses on... CV writing and anxiety, they're not going to deal with the absolutely entrenched problems. No, they're not.
I'm going to say a word and you're going to think I've gone mad.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah.
Potholes.
Yeah.
You don't know what I'm talking about, do you?
No.
When a pothole first appears, if you fixed it, it'd cost you about 50 quid.
Okay, yeah.
And if you wait until it's, breaking axles and wrecking cars. This came up in the play I saw last night. He makes a brilliant point about exactly what you're describing. Yeah. That the character involved was talking about the probation service, but also about mental health treatment within the context of probation. And if you get in there early, or you recognise obvious problems and treat them and deal with them and help, then you save yourself a ton of money in the long run, and a ton of trouble as well for families, for victims, for the young people themselves, and yet they don't do it.
Yeah, and this is the thing I will say about having a son, with additional needs as well. Now, I'm an absolute whiler, and I have absolutely fought, campaigned, etc., over the years to get him services. And although he has anxiety and he will always need support with work, he is in a place where, but that's another thing, because some people will always need support to work, and that support isn't there. Jobs are not there for disabled people and people who need reasonable adjustments. I can tell you that we had enough problems getting them a voluntary job, because as soon as people hear reasonable adjustments, they do not want to know. So that's another issue that this government has got. Where are all these jobs in the first place that are going to support people into work? But this is exactly it. I see a lot of people who my son could have been in a position by, not known how to fight for it.
And he'd be in an even a deeper hole than he is now. Do you think, I don't know quite what word to use. Is there any fat to trim in this system? Because the numbers are stunning. Genuinely stunning, and the use of the word unsustainable seems fair. If it's going to hit £70 billion a year, then massive tax rises notwithstanding, that's close to impossible.
Yeah, but the problem is, James. The problem is that a lot of these issues, because they're increasing, and another thing we see as a mental health worker as well is bad housing, social problems,
rents.
Private rents, people in very unstable living conditions. Now,
0-hour contracts if you are working. All of these things add to all of the problems we're describing, and Labour seem to be coming at it from the wrong end of the problem.
Yeah, and people not getting access to health care as well when they've needed it. Especially women. This is especially a thing for women, that women's health conditions are dismissed as something else. The reasons are absolutely multifold, and just blaming people and saying, well, you're not trying hard enough, and you're.
And that's the rhetoric, isn't it? That's to be fair to the government, they haven't gone down the road that some of the people the Guardian describe as right-wing politicians and media have gone down, but it feels like the same. It feels like the same tune, doesn't it? Even if the words are different, the suggestion that there are that this implicit suggestion that there's a significant number of people. I think we all agree that a lot of people who aren't currently working could work with the right help.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
It doesn't reach your ears like that if you're one of them, does it?
No. No,
Linda.
and also that the help is not there. The help that they're talking about is not the help that's needed. We need, we do need better health services. We need, and just another point, like a caller said before, like my son gets PIP. Well, we pay for counselling for him because he was on a CAMHS waiting list for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
What?
And the difference it makes, we're big. As you probably know, big fans of therapy and counselling on this programme, and big recognisers of the immeasurable impacts it can have on people's lives and the difficulty of securing it via the normal NHS route. So there it is. That phrase should really be tattooed on the eyelids of any of the people who think it's easy to claim these benefits, but it is there to help the recipient with the extra daily costs of their disability. And if you're querying the wisdom of it or the fairness of it, then you should just try it for a while. It'd be nice, wouldn't it, if we could press a button and you could live with some of these conditions, some of these disabilities, without the help that society, that we provide for each other. I often think of taxation like that. It's the help that we provide for each other. But hey-ho, it's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11. Would you like a little? Do you want a little glimpse into my world? Do you want to know what it's like being me? I'll read you this one first. This is from Martin, who's in Ashford. He says, James, I listen to your show every day. Some days I wish I could get hold of you with both hands to adjust your outlook, but not today. You seem to have a sympathetic, realistic and human view of the PIP system. I had to go through hell with the first PIP assessment for my wife Hilary, who passed away just before COVID. She was flatly turned down with a score of 0. Macmillan got involved and she was awarded the maximum. Unfortunately, this was only a few months before her death. The PIP assessment is a minefield. It is stressful and demeaning. So thank you, Martin. But Liz is listening to the same show, and she has sent a message saying, some ableist bleep going down on LBC right now. He's just said we can't possibly know the reason why the welfare bill has gone up by 13 billion between 2020-24, and there must be people in that group who won't rather than can't work. I am raging, capital letters. And she goes on to tell me that it's COVID, which I have suggested and mentioned on at least 4 separate occasions. So there it is, 2 people listening to the same programme, one of them determined to hear something that hasn't been said, and one of them kind enough to offer up a few words of warmth in response to things that have actually been said. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm going to take a few more calls on this because it's hugely important, and it is, of course, profoundly political, and yet there is room for nuance. The idea that many people currently not working and in receipt of disability benefits could work with the right help and support is one that almost nobody, the last texter notwithstanding, but almost nobody is going to dispute or deny. The problem is, as soon as you say those words out loud, somebody who is pretty firmly in the can't camp is going to think that they are being targeted, is going to think that the authorities are coming for them. And then there are the people who none of us could know for sure whether they could move from can't to can with the right help, without suggesting for a minute that they currently won't. And I like Keir Starmer, you know I do. But it isn't an area in which the Labour Party is expected to move much. If you want to understand the politics of what they're doing at the moment, I think the best way to understand it is an impatience, an impatience with the idea that you're far back in the queue. So the reason why the Labour government is making noises in the arena of welfare and in the arena of immigration that slightly detached, middle-class, theoretical lefties like me are troubled by is because we never feel as if we're at the back of the queue. You know, the shift in support for Labour over the years from the traditional working class community to potentially slightly patronising middle-class voters who think that they are casting their vote in order to help people less fortunate than themselves. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but it has been a measurable and serious shift. And what it has failed to reflect, and what I think leaderships previously have failed to reflect, is that concept of being in the back of the queue yourself. That concept of being far back in the queue yourself. And an awful lot of people have spent an awful lot of time being told that they're not far back in the queue, and therefore they can't understand why their life isn't better. And this is an explanation, not an excuse. What I think Starmer is doing is trying to appeal to people who feel that others have been allowed to push in front of them in the queue. And this is hideously hazardous. I certainly wouldn't do it if I was Prime Minister, but I'm not. So by making the kind of comments he's making in some of these arenas, you could chalk it up as being worried about the reform vote, but that's a little bit patronising. I don't think anyone's worried about the Tory vote at the moment because there isn't one really to speak of. That might change again. We'll get a catch-up later in the programme with the latest troubles plaguing Nigel Farage's latest outfit. But in the attempt to understand why Labour are doing what they're doing, they are appealing to people who you would describe as the British workforce who feel, rightly or wrongly, that people have pushed in front of them in the queue. That's all. Not excusing it, just explaining it. The problem is that some of the people in the queue, when you turn your attention to disability benefit, can't push in front of anyone, figuratively and, of course, literally. And that's why this is such an interesting story, if you like, an important story. And it's why we're dedicating a bit of time to it today, despite the fact that the announcement hasn't yet been made. And that is... that's an indication of how important it is. And the reason why we're talking about it today is because as soon as it appears in the news, people start getting scared. And that's why I talk about it on a day like today, when normally I wait for the detail before I get stuck into a story. Would you like the finest missing word round ever? Well, maybe not ever, but it's so good that it's over a week old. I just forgot about it. I keep a little folder now of things that I'm likely to forget about. And then do you know what I do? I forget about my folder. I forget about the folder full of forgettable things, which is an extraordinary achievement, really, because the whole point of the folder is so that I don't forget about the forgettable things. But now I forget about the folder full of forgettable things. And this was in the folder full of forgettable things. It was supposed to be the missing word round last Monday. Now that I'm thinking about the folder full of forgettable things that I keep forgetting, I'm worried that I might have forgotten that I did this missing word round last Monday and then forgot to give you the other. Either way, are you ready for this missing word round? Are you ready for this one? Britons, I did do it. Did I do it? Are you sure I didn't do it? Have you had any days off in the last 8 days? Okay. Sorry, I was talking to Keith then, in case you were worried. Britons were mostly blank 5,000 years ago. What do you think the missing word is in this headline? Britons were what I quite like the idea of is people who knew what the answer was last week, but they've now forgotten what the answer is to the story that I keep in my folder for things that I might forget, but then I forget about the folder. It's an awful lot of F's. It's the most risky syllable, you know. It's the most risky syllable for a radio presenter, unless you're talking about Jeremy Hunt, of course. But the second riskiest syllable for a radio presenter to be deploying with such gay abandon is probably the F. But Britons were mostly what 5,000 years ago? Do you want to have a crack at that? Britons were mostly blank 5,000 years ago. I love it. I'm not going to give you any clues at all because it would make it too obvious. I am, however, and the answer's not asleep or ginger. No, and it's not blue either. John says I did do it last. Liam says I did do it last week. I don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I didn't. 11:12 is the time. Back to this question. How easy is it to get PIP if you are a young person with mild mental health problems? And how do we tell the difference? We haven't really gone there, have we? Between can't and won't. How would an authority, I mean, someone marches in there. They did it the wrong way round under Ian Duncan Smith. It was almost as if people were being paid to prove that you didn't deserve something when you did. I don't think they were quite on commission, but it felt like it sometimes. But how would a compassionate society distinguish between can't and won't when presented with, let us say, a 21-year-old person who can't currently work, who says that they can't currently work? Anthony's in Newcastle. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hello, I'm on the phone because of my son. My son's 22 and he's just completed his college.
I need you to do something with your phone. It sounds like you've got a scarf tied around your gob.
Is that better?
It is a bit, yeah. Go on.
I'm bringing up about my son who's 22. He's just finished college.
It's not better at all. What have you done since you spoke to the producer? I'm sorry, mate. I'm not being funny, but have you done anything since you spoke to the producer?
No, I haven't moved at all.
That's just bizarre. Can you hear it all right, or is it too muffled?
I can hear you.
All right, go on. You keep talking, but if it is too muffled, we'll try and fix the line. Go on.
Right. My son's 22 and he's just finished college.
Yeah.
He's got epilepsy, some learning disabilities, and he's also got he's on the autistic scale.
Yes.
Now he's done it's not work experience. What's it? Where you go work somewhere for free?
Yeah.
The rich people usually do it.
Yes.
Internship.
I can't, mate, I'm going to have to come back. Eleanor can't hear you. So I want to hear this story. Can we please do our level? I know there's no technology we can do, but let's get him to go up a ladder or something like that. Daniel's in Sunderland, so from Newcastle to Sunderland, but I haven't got time to talk to him until after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
16 minutes after 11, Britons were mostly blank 5,000 years ago. Garrett suggests that we're mostly still talking about the weather. I quite like that, actually. Lester takes things a little bit too seriously when he writes, Britons were mostly hunter-gatherers 5,000 years ago. Lewis goes the other way, where Britons were mostly unemployed 5,000 years ago. Quite a few of you are getting it right, but I don't know how many of you cheated and how many of you have not. Neanderthals is Roddy's answer. Karen goes for gorgeous, which is a little optimistic. And Karen, the same Karen also goes for smelly, which works. Roddy wants to know, did you get your concussion check, James? I did get my concussion check. I should probably have given you an update on this. So I did the show with a plaster on last Wednesday, and then went home afterwards, took the plaster off, and was swiftly advised to go to A&E, where I received 7 stitches. So I then came on air on Thursday, and I thought I would arrange my hair, which is a little longer than I used to wear it. I thought I would stop it. I thought I would arrange my hair in a way to cover my stitches. Looking back, I think I should have worn my hair normally, because there is some debate over who I looked more like with my hair cunningly arranged to cover my stitches. Was it A? If I tell you that Guy Verhofstadt, the European politician, was by far the least offensive of the people it was suggested I looked like when I brushed my hair in a way to cover my stitches, you'll get an idea of the direction in which this conversation is going. Jones, the engineer, formerly of this parish, pointed out I bore more than a passing resemblance to the Ricky Gervais character Derek, and I'm afraid that when you actually saw the imagery alongside each other, as he very kindly provided, it was impossible to deny. But more than possibly anybody else, I looked a little bit like Adolf Hitler. And the thing was, I knew that because I'd shown my daughter and her friend the night before. I said, I think I'll go to work like this tomorrow, but I'm a little bit worried that I look like Adolf Hitler. And they obviously found it hilarious. But then I did it anyway. But I didn't have a concussion, to answer Roddy's question, so I don't even have that excuse for coming on air looking like a cross between Derek, Adolf Hitler and Guy Verhofstadt. I think I might get it all cut off for summer. Actually, I think it avoids all sorts of problems. But I'm getting my stitches taken out. No, not the full Ian Dale. I'll have a nice sort of like an Alexander Armstrong type of thing, or you know, like I used to have it a bit. Anyway, I digress. But thank you, Roddy. At least someone cares. What is the answer to the missing word round? The answer is, just taking off pause to see how many other people have played the game, and the answer is black. Britons were mostly black 5,000 years ago. And thank you, everyone, joining in with the laugh at James's head game that was that remains popular. Davey says, crikey, James, that's exactly the 2 I was thinking of, although more Derek than Adolf, to be fair. Isn't it? How can you be on the radio and still be the source of so much appearance-based? It's these bloody viral clips, isn't it? It's YouTube and clips. They've not only improved my life immeasurably, they've also ruined it forever. Let's talk about a rock and a hard place. You just can't win, can you? And a quick shout to Bina, who says, OMG, I'm in Booth's supermarket with my headphones on, and you've just made me snort like a pig. Good. Anyway, back to the question of benefits and cuts and PIP. Daniel's in Sunderland. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I'm calling just linked to the PIP being frozen,
yes,
and not rising with inflation.
That's a suggestion. There might be what they call a kite. They might be flying a kite in Westminster, but it is in the news, which is why we're talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you know, you look at that and you start to panic, right? So I'll tell you just a little bit about my son. He's the one with the condition. He's when he was 4. We went in for an autism diagnosis and came away with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. He came away with autism as well, but we obviously wanted to go through the PIP process and get him all of the support and everything we could do, and getting through that process and asking the questions that they ask. And by the time we finally got everything that we needed, it took 3 years to actually get this. because it's a massive. There's from discussions with all the other families with the same condition, they don't really believe autism diagnoses, particularly at that age.
Okay. I mean, you might have been unlucky in that context, but equally it is very young, isn't it? And so they might say it's not really going to manifest until a little bit later.
And that's fair, but if I also link this to his mobility needs as well with his muscle wasting condition. Okay? He's going to, he's 7-year-old. He can just barely walk.
Oh, mate.
But he could walk at 4. And what we're seeing is his ability to walk is slowly fading away. He's going to lose his ability to move his arms. Then, it's muscles, right? Your heart's a muscle, yeah?
Of course.
Yeah, that's going to die as well, and he'll be dead by the time he's 16.
Do you know that? That's the prognosis, is it?
So, depending on literally lifestyle conditions,
sure.
How well he's looked after, and literally comes down to Pip, right?
Yeah. Tell us a bit more about that. What is the difference that Pip makes in terms of the life he can lead?
Yeah, absolutely right. So there's 2 components to this. There's the care component, and there's the mobility component. So with care, that little extra £100-200, whatever it is a month, means that we can pay for somebody to come in the house and clean, just as an idea.
Yeah.
I don't do this, but it's something I'm looking at doing as he gets older, so that I don't do that, so that I'm able to work more.
Mm.
So this care component is really there to help support that. And if it's frozen with inflation, that's going to start coming down. Now, I've only just finally been able to get a wheelchair accessible vehicle, a van through the mobility care. That took about a year to apply, and even that process comes off your PIP. So they take away the mobility component, or the higher component of it, to pay for the van. That's fine. But I went onto the van, and it goes, yes, we'll take that component off you, but you also need to pay £6,000.
Is there? I mean, listen, there is a fear that Starmer's going down a road that the Tories have been down before, and some of the rhetoric adds to that fear. But is there also a recognition that the system is quite sclerotic, and that there is the problem is they're selling it as savings and cuts, aren't they? Whereas most of us think that you improve things by spending more money, usually, not always.
Yeah. James. I'm so incredibly disappointed.
Yeah, I thought you would
with the Labour government, because they stand on a platform of change, and I'm very I was quite supportive of a left-wing centrist kind of Labour government, which was again massively disappointing. And it fought Labour to get into power. They went right-wing, right? But why do they? They're falling into this conversation.
Well, they haven't gone right way. I'm not here to relitigate the direction of traffic so far, but there's quite a lot of stuff the nationalisation of the railways. There's an awful, and we don't know that PIP is going to be suspended. But what are you? I mean, and if it isn't, you'll be the same place you are now. Right.
But James, it's opening these conversations
that's
that
the problem.
we didn't
You're
expect,
absolutely
that we
right.
wanted to have with Labour. We didn't want that. We thought that now that this is all great, we're going to have.
No, you see, I didn't, mate. As soon as I saw these numbers about these increases and about the number of young people in particular, and this isn't a conversation about your boy, but it doesn't matter how many times I say that, does it? If it reaches your ears as a conversation about your boy, it's bringing stress and upset into your life, and that's why I'm as upset as you are with some of the direction of traffic. But as soon as you see the numbers of people who since 2020 have just not been able to do anything, then something, it's not a phrase I like, Dan, but something must be done. They have to try to address it. If they get it wrong, then we'll vote them out. But they have to try to do something. You can't just sit there and watch this bill go up to £70 billion.
Yeah, I get that, but why is it that those people are the ones who get targeted? You're targeting people who can't help themselves. I have to have this conversation for my son because he can't defend himself. Other people who are on PIP can't defend themselves. We have to have other people to have this conversation. But when this conversation doesn't get out there because it's filled up by the other side of it. Oh, there's people on disability benefits, they're fraud and everything. Yeah. Sorry, James, again, I'm getting very, very animated.
No, it's all right. I get 20 minutes every morning to go where you've just gone, and it drives me nuts as well, and I haven't got a lad in your position. But I can promise you one thing, that this show will never be one of those places where the voices of the liars and the idiots can drown out the voices of the experienced and the evidenced. But I wish I had more grounds for optimism to offer to you, other than, as things stand, your son isn't in the categories that seem to be under scrutiny.
Good. Can I just shout out on the excellent work that the charity MD UK does? Because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to have the conversations with other people and other families, and they help me with the PIP process and things like that. Yeah. So, just
you mean the PIP
UK.
Process, MDUK? If anyone wants to bung them a few
Muscular
quid,
Dystrophy UK,
or find out a little bit more about them. When you say they helped you with the PIP process, that would be the PIP process that right-wing politicians and commentators claim is too easy for people to gain.
Too easy and too difficult. Yeah. James, took me 3 years. 3 years.
I hear you. And of course, your son's condition has deteriorated during that period, and it's not as if they're popping back every couple of months to check and adjust their figures accordingly. Thank you, Daniel, and never, ever, ever apologise for getting emotional on this programme. I'm not speaking to him now. I'm speaking to you as well. It's incredibly emotional territory, and it is deeply disappointing in many ways that it's a Labour government that is causing such concern to people like Daniel. I fingers crossed it turns out to be unfounded, but if you're flying a kite and the kite is frightening people, you probably shouldn't have flown the kite in the first place. It's 11:27. I've got Anthony in Newcastle back, hopefully on a better line. You were telling me about your boy. He's 22. He's done the work experience. He's got no visible disabilities, but he wants to work. And what's happening, Anthony?
But just kind of seem to get in the door anyway. You know, he puts down that he's autistic. He's got a certain degree of learning disabilities. So he went to special school. He went to a special college. He's got no GCSEs to speak of because he can't do a GCSE. Sure. But he's also got drop epilepsy, and he can't get a chance. No one wants to give the lad a break. I mean, he'd done 6 months. I keep forgetting what it's called. Work experience. But there wasn't a job at the end of it.
And do you mean an internship?
An internship. Yes.
There we go.
But there wasn't a job at the end of it. I mean, sometimes when I listen to certain people on this radio station, they're on about things. You know, they're on about young children who turn up at school and they're not nappy trained by the time they're 4.
Yeah.
He was one of them boys. I mean, his younger brother, who has none of these problems, was nappy trained by the time he was 2 years old.
Yeah.
But I would like to shout, like the last kid who just put a shout out to somebody, I'd like to put a shout to the Hadrian School in Newcastle, because if it wasn't for that school actually fighting to get him in at that school, my boy would have just been in a normal school on a Wednesday afternoon. They would have got him some extra helping, and that's not what he needed. You know,
he'd have got lost.
Yeah, he would have got lost in the system. He was just put out. You know, there's nothing the matter with him. But I mean, we went to Asda the other week, and he made his mind up with what he wanted to buy. He phoned up the Asda to see if it was in stock. When he got there, it wasn't, and I could see him standing there in the aisle crying, and he just wanted to cuddle with his dad. But people were walking past him because all they see is a 22-year-old man who's built like a rugby player, who's upset over something daft, you know.
It's regulation and processing, isn't it? And that, again, is something that can get better with the right help and support. And that's what he got at Hadrian's School, was the right help and support. How's it affecting him, the work angle, Anthony?
Now he seems disheartened because he's applied and doesn't get any the worst thing is he gets no response back. Oh. He doesn't get any response back from anywhere. He's done his own CV. I mean, the college helped him with his CV, but now he's finished college. There's no more college for him to do, and he's at that lost place. And all he needs is a chance. You know, he's done some work experience when he was in the high school in a town called Wallsend, and the women who worked with him in that volunteering shop still remember him to this day. He's a lovely lad, you know,
clearly
polite. Nice.
What kind of work do you think he might be able to do? What kind of work do you think might
retail?
suit
him? He would love to work in retail. He would like to work in somewhere, you know, like yourself, you work at Top Shop or whatever it was.
Oi, River Island, mate.
River Island. But he would like, you know, he's interested in fashion and bits and bobs. But I mean, you can't even get in the door at an Asda or a Tesco or an Iceland.
And he never gets any feedback. He never gets any advice on what to do differently.
No, but I mean, if you're seeing us all out as a family walking, you wouldn't think there was anything the matter with him. I mean, at this point, we're even going to court over the youngest son.
Yeah.
Because we can't take a holiday during the ordinary holiday times because the eldest son doesn't like to be round the pool with loads of screaming kids. It would upset him, and he would end up going. Doesn't matter if you're in Spain, doesn't matter if you're in Greece, or if you're in a caravan in Northumberland.
Sensory.
If there was not just screaming kids running around, he'll go and sit by himself. So I've now got to go to court to take the
younger lad on holiday at the time when the older lad can cope.
Yeah, what the school suggested to her was, why don't we take 2 holidays? One with the eldest one and one with the youngest one.
Yeah.
That's their suggestion. I mean, I'm not going to pay the fine. I'm going to argue this, but it's, as far as I'm aware, I believe I'm going to try and use what other people use, Section 5 of the Human Rights Act.
Well, I can only wish you luck. And if anyone listening thinks they might be able to help the lad out, then do get in touch with us and we'll see what I can do. But obviously, it's very difficult to make any promises or to. I certainly can't make any guarantees. But crikey, there you go. And listen, my phone lines are full. And it's 11:30 already. And listen, I know that you know someone who knows someone. Well, look, I'll give you an example, all right, I'm sure I can find. Here you go. So this is from Rick. And Rick's a good lad, and he makes some excellent points. But there are stories like this out there. I just don't think there are as many as the Sun or the Daily Mail or the kind of people Anthony was referring to would have you believe. A close family member uses the mother-in-law's disability vehicle for over a decade, not once providing any transport or support for said mother-in-law. It's a brand new, fully maintained car every 3 years. Both the mother-in-law's daughters also claimed disability benefits. Unfortunately, it seemed to be the way that this family had learned to live. My partner, who suffers from extremely debilitating anxiety, pushes herself every day to work and receives no benefits as she failed the criteria by answering honestly about her abilities. She didn't read the websites that coach you as to how to ensure you will be accepted. So these situations do exist. But goodness me, do they really constitute the rhetoric and the belief that the current government appears to believe? And the reason I think that, but it's funny, isn't it, the things that get under your skin? When even The Guardian are reporting the lies of all the people who were wrong about Brexit, wrong about Johnson, wrong about austerity, wrong about Trump, but they're going to be miraculously right about benefits? It seems unlikely. But it's not happy reading, is it? It's 11:34. Crikey, what happened to the time? My apologies to Thomas Watts, who has the latest headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:37. That sentencing that you've just heard of Kyle Clifford, containing some pretty grisly details, especially, I'd suggest, for admirers of Donald Trump, one of his key allies. The other night welcomed Andrew and Tristan Tate, the online misogynists accused of human trafficking and various other abuses across the US, the UK and Romania, to his Ultimate Fighting Championship event, being filmed hugging him. His name is Dana White. He's a big ally of Donald Trump. And back in Blighty, Cambridge Crown Court has been hearing details of this murderer stroke rapist's background and online activities at a hearing which he has refused to attend. These sort of misogynists in the manosphere are always incredibly cowardly, aren't they, when push comes to shove? He hasn't even got the guts to face up to the reality of his own actions. But he looked up Andrew Tate's podcast the night before raping and murdering his ex-girlfriend before killing her sister and her mother. The court has heard that he had been the subject of complaints at work about inappropriately sexualized comments, or locker room talk, of course, as the Andrew Tate fan Nigel Farage prefers to call it. More parallels there with Donald Trump. What do you and I consider to be inappropriately sexualized comments about, for example, grabbing women by their genitals, although they're unlikely to use such sanitized language. People like Farage here, locker room talk and banter. One of Louise's friends, his ex-girlfriend, observed him putting on a video of Tate's which showed animals that had been drugged. That might be one way to turn the great British public against Tate, if he abuses animals, never mind women. When she asked him why he was watching it, he said it was funny. And the day before the murders, he was searching for Tate's podcast. The prosecutor said that his consumption of Andrew Tate's material should be considered by the judge when sentencing. She added, Andrew Tate can properly be described as a poster boy for misogynists, for those who view women as possessions to be controlled. It is no coincidence that it was Andrew Tate the defendant turned to the night before he would go on to commit these acts of violence against women. We submit that is entirely consistent with the planning of an attack, including the act of rape. And remember that Nigel Farage has described himself as part of the same phenomenon as Andrew Tate. I doubt I'm ever going to get the chance to interview him again, but some studios seem to have him on almost a perma booking, so hopefully he'll be asked shortly about why he sees himself as the same phenomenon as a man described in a British court trying a man for the rape and murder of British women as a poster boy for misogynists and those who view women as possessions to be controlled. What phenomenon is it, do you think, Farage is talking about when he describes him and Tate as being in the same sort of place? Sentencing will last for the rest of the morning. I don't think we'll get the sentence itself until Sheila is on air shortly after 2 p.m. today. But Clifford has refused to attend himself and remains in prison. Back to the conversation we are having about PIP, cuts, austerity, disability benefits, and the troubling timbre of the conversation. Kathy's in Barnstaple. Kathy, what would you like to say?
First of all, what I'd like to say, well, the process is horrific. I've got physical disabilities, but I've taught people of all ages adult literacy and numeracy, and I've met young people who can't get out of the door if they have anxiety. But the other thing is that mental health is a disability. If you declare you have a disability of mental health, you will not get employment. It's as simple as that. I've seen it happen time and time again with the adults I've worked with. The process for some people is horrendous because it is dehumanising in the first place.
Let's talk about the process. Talk to me about PIP specifically, if you can, Kathy, about the idea that The Guardian tells me many right-wing commentators and politicians think it's really easy to get PIP.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I had a lifetime award of DLA. Yeah. And that was fine. And then I was transferred to PIP. I remember the lovely Esther McVeigh saying that people, it was in the Daily Mail, people get PIP DLA from what they write on the form. Absolute rubbish. I had a lifetime award because I have such limited mobility. So then I had to go through the PIP process, and we were all terrified because the purpose of it was to cut money. And I went to that assessment with a friend as a witness and to support, and you get the report back and they lie. I was supposed to have reported that I walked 30 metres into the assessment centre. I didn't. And then when you pick that report apart, I sent in rafts of medical evidence from every health professional and support worker responsible for helping me. It was all ignored. In fact, she didn't even have it in front of her.
What do you feel like? We're going to run out of time, but I want to know how when conversations like this unfold, and we have to have them because they are,
absolutely,
they're national news. But we might rather wait for the detail before we can dig into it. But when the tone of the conversation, Starmer tells Labour MPs that unfair welfare bill must be slashed. How does it reach you?
Diabolical, because, since COVID, you have people with long COVID.
There are so many stories today that have not mentioned COVID once, and it is going to be a large part of the answer to the mystery, as we've said countless times on this programme. You're presented with something that doesn't make sense when you're analysing it with the tools at your disposal. You probably need a new tool, and the tool in this case would be a proper understanding of long COVID.
I'll try and find that out. I've got time on my hand, but I do know several people who have got it.
Yes, so do I.
And
so do I.
It has crippled them.
And it puts them in that really weird space, that fluctuating invisible illness. Whereas on a Monday they might seem fine, but on a Tuesday they can't get out of bed. And our society is curiously skewed against people in those sort of conditions. It's probably an evolutionary defence in some way to be wary of weakness, and yet it's a mark of civilization. I forget who it was that said that's how you can tell how civilized a society is, by how it looks after its sick and disabled. The Spartans used to throw them off cliffs. I suppose we could confidently state that that's not going to be policy under the current government. I don't know about the last one. 11:45 is the time. Thank you, Kathy. You've taken me up to the wire.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48. Only one. I think it's Idiot's Corner for Sue. So it's Andrew Tate's fault that he murdered those women, is it? I thought you were brighter than that. Sue, I hope you're not suggesting that it's only brown people who can be radicalised by extremist content that they come across online, because if you are, that would make you a massive racist. As it is, I'm happy to give you the benefit of the doubt and just put you in Idiot's Corner instead rather than Racist's Corner. But of course, people can be radicalised by the content that they come across online, and indeed encouraged to do terrible, terrible things. Would they have done them without those influences? We will never know. But the prosecution lawyer in the case of the murderer we were discussing earlier is making a very clear case of cause and some effect. Happy to help, always. 11:49 is the time. I introduced you some time ago to Guy Shrubsole, not long ago actually. It coincided with the publication of his book, The Lie of the Land. And I said to you at the time that here was a fella that I suspected we'd be hearing more from in the future, because his fields of expertise coincided so completely with some of the things that we have developed a burgeoning interest in together. Not least that business about the landowning elite trousering billions and billions of taxpayer pounds, a conversation not entirely irrelevant to the one that we're having about benefit cuts today. And of course, his other book, the one that was published before The Lie of the Land, was entitled Who Owns England? And unless I've misunderstood the story, then the government is poised, I think, Guy Shrubsole, the government is poised to actually answer your question.
Yes, well, hello, James. It's lovely to chat to you again. I'm quite excited because late last week, the government actually quietly announced plans to start to open up the land registry, which is the official body that registers who owns land in this country. And, we've talked before about who owns land in England and how it's one of our oldest and darkest secrets. It's a story that goes back to literally to the Norman Conquest and William the Conqueror coming over and declaring all the land in England is his, and then he parceled it out to some of his mates. And, it's always been bound up with wealth and power in England. And we know from, various statistics that the government have released and through a lot of work to try and comb through data, farm subsidy payments and other such things, that something like 1% of the population owns half the land in England. But what we haven't known up until this point is the full details of who owns all of that land. And that's why I was pretty excited that late last week, Minister Matthew Pennycook, he's the housing minister, and he's ultimately in charge of the land registry. He sent them a letter saying that he wants them to widen and deepen transparency of land ownership and control, to work on opening up existing data and information on land, to prioritise free access to data, that means dropping fees to search the land registry, and to make rapid progress towards enabling others to map land registry data. And this is really, really significant, because at the moment, you can find out who owns land by going to the land registry, but you have to pay them a fee, and you have to pay them £7 to find out who owns a single parcel of land. There are 24 million land parcels registered with the land registry. So you do the maths, and if you're, somebody like you and I, you'd have to pay £168 million to find out who owns all the land in England and Wales. Now, most of us don't have that money to hand, so it's obvious that to have more transparency around who owns land, we're going to have to see changes to that. We're going to have to see the government drop the search fees.
What do we think Penny Cook's motivation is? Is it going to tally with yours, or is there any alternative reading of the facts?
I mean, I think the minister. I mean, he outlines in his letter that he sees this as helping with house building in this country.
So if I want to build some houses on that perfectly suitable package of land over there, at the moment, it would be quite hard to find out who it belongs to. Even if I pay the money, it might end up being a succession of offshore trusts or something like that. Exactly. This is just going to massively increase transparency, and therefore, I think you used the phrase innovation and growth by boosting these startup businesses.
Absolutely. And there's all sorts of things that opening up the land registry would help with. It would help with understanding inequalities of wealth and land ownership in this country. It would help locate better where Russian oligarchs or other overseas billionaires are stashing money in the UK property market. But it would also help to just uncover where developers and other landowners are land banking and are contributing to high house prices and housing crisis.
I think land banking is in the news today, but I don't want to jump the gun. But before I do that, who is likely to resist this? I don't think they'll be very successful, but apart from Russian oligarchs, who might not want the truth of who owns England to be in the public eye?
There has always been lobbying by big landowning lobby groups to try and maintain secrecy around this. But I hope they would see sense that actually in the 21st century, the public has a right to know more of this information. You can look and see what happened with Companies House a decade ago. Yeah. Companies House, you used to have to pay, I think it was like £3 for every single document about a company in this country that was registered in this country. They dropped all their search fees 10 years ago. That hasn't stopped or solved problems of fraudulent companies being set up, but it's certainly helped to shine a light on when it happens. And so I think the same thing would happen here with the land registry. And you really got to, I really hope that progressive landowners will get behind this.
It's the stuff of revolution, isn't it? 50% of the land being owned by 1% of the population, and probably a relatively small shift in distribution since 1066, as you say. When I was in Norfolk at the weekend, I'm always struck by how feudal some regions of England are. There's parts of Norfolk where you can't really breathe without paying the Earl of Leicester, and that's the kind of practice that you're I mean, that's not technically true. You are allowed to breathe. It's parking that's the problem. But the Earl of Leicester has got his finger in more pies than Tom's thumb. It's or Tommy Horner. That's the kind of thing we're going to discover, isn't it?
Feudalism in many parts of this country has never died. That's absolutely true, yes.
Okay, so back to land banking. Front page of the Telegraph today. Farmers hit again in Rayner land grab. It's so exhausting at the moment. When I'm not feeling sorry for parents who can't afford to pay VAT on private school fees, I'm feeling desperately sorry for farmers who can't afford to pay inheritance tax on their multi-million-pound estates. Is this another demand for my undiluted sympathy that I will be unable to resist?
Well, look, if I understand what the government is actually proposing here, it's simply to go back to the situation that existed between the Second World War and the 1960s, which is when a lot of our new towns were built, a huge swathe of council housing, affordable housing in this country was built, back when actually the situation was different in terms of land values and what councils and public developers had to pay for land. And they bought land back then at what's called existing use value. In other words, the value of an acre of farmland, rather than having to pay the landowner what's called hope value. the sort of the breathless anticipation of a landowner that they might get rather than £20,000 for an acre of farmland, that they might get £2 million for an acre of farmland, because in the future there might be a house built on it. And that obviously massively inflates the price of housing. It makes building affordable housing in this country incredibly difficult. And so I would totally welcome what the government seems to be proposing around changes to the land value.
Until they come for your house. I mean, that's the thing about compulsory purchasing, isn't it? I appreciate you're not a massive landowner, but you can understand why it feels wrong. We'll think of those farms, it's probably apocryphal, that are stuck between two lanes of a motorway because one man refused to give up his... It's a little bit Englishman's home is his castle territory, isn't it?
Well, let's be really clear. Residential property has never been part of compulsory purchase legislation. You simply cannot do that. And I completely agree that a government shouldn't be able to simply seize that sort of land from people. But, if you literally own a castle, if your home is a castle and 10,000 acres with it, I think actually there is more of a public interest there in saying, well, maybe we do need to build some more affordable homes in some of those areas of land. And
anything that makes that easier and removes some sticks from the spokes of the wheels of building has got to be a good thing.
Exactly. And what I really think the story you highlight in today's Telegraph shows that it's not newts or bats or environmental protections that are holding up house building in this country. It's land banking by developers and landowners.
It's people
who demand sky-high profits for when they sell their land.
You'll like this from Maria. OMG, James, I read that book and I felt like I was living in the 15th century. The aristocracy, the Church of England, the charity sector, the king, offshore investors. It's outrageous how influential these people are. And the government is complicit in true and deep reform. Just look at the challenge in the High Court to leasehold reform under the Human Rights Act. Does she have a point?
Absolutely. But, let's take the first step towards changing that.
So this is a good day.
Land registry.
This is good news. Well done, Matthew.
Let's open up the land registry and let's see who owns this country and let's start taking changes.
Let's see who owns this country. Isn't that an extraordinary phrase to reflect upon? Things that you didn't realise you didn't know. Guy Shrubsole, author of, appropriately enough, Who Owns England, and latterly The Lie of the Land, which explores similar territory and establishes, in fact, that these reputations for great stewardship and being the custodians of our countryside are often ill-deserved by the kind of landowners who fit into the category, trampling over our best-loved landscapes, polluting rivers, draining fenlands, burning moorlands. It's a magnificent piece of work. Both of them are, actually. Add that to your recommendation. That's 3 today. So both the guys' books and Punch by James Graham at the New Vic Theatre. The Young Vic. Why do I keep calling it the New Vic? Because it's the Old Vic, isn't it? So it's the Young Vic. What's the opposite of old? New or young? See? It's not that big a mistake to make.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 12. So in the last 5 hours that we've spent together, we've done 3 hours on online safety and 2 hours on potential disability benefit cuts. I think you'll agree with me that constitutes a lot of time in the deep end, doesn't it? Coming up later in this hour, we're going to get a bit of a steer on just how serious the situation is in the United States with regard to fears of recession and stock market dips. Hey, I read something brilliant. Did you know that they now refer to a financial catastrophe of Trussian proportions in the United States? So her desperate bid to become famous in America appears to be succeeding. So what you'll say is this, excuse me, Dwight, is this a catastrophe? Actually, I don't know. Let me get an American accent out of the bottom. Is this a catastrophe of Trussian proportions? What was that? What was that? I don't even know what state that was. I think he's moved around a lot. This fictional American newscaster that I am. He's moved around a lot, and he quite likes a beer. That's the fella I was just channeling. So tell me, Dwight, is this a catastrophe of Trussian proportions, or are things not that serious yet? And then Dwight responds by going, well, Dwight, I don't think we're looking at a Trussian catastrophe yet. We're looking at a little minor catastrophe. It's more akin to the catastrophe that happened under Ronald Reagan. So Liz Truss's name is now a byword for unprecedented financial catastrophe in the United States of America. And we will find out a little later this hour how close to Trussian proportions. If my guest is called Dwight, I'm going to give the producer a promotion. But I very much doubt that the guest is called Dwight. It wasn't the same accent, Scott. Pay attention. And we're also catching up with, I mean, there may be more developments by the time we get to 12:45, but we're also catching up with the infighting and hypocrisy currently plaguing Nigel Farage's latest political party. I mean, who on earth could have seen that coming? Speaking of that kind of brand of very dishonest and hypocritical politics, there is actually a story around today, if I can find it, which involves somebody who was indeed prosecuted or at least arrested for exercising their freedom of speech. And yet it was a case about which I heard barely a squeak from the people who claim without any evidence that you can be locked up in this country for exercising your freedom of speech. Another thing I was reminded of in the play I saw last night, Punch, James Graham at the Young Vic, absolute masterpiece, truly one of the finest new plays I've seen in a very, very long time. But when the protagonist, who you've met actually, was incarcerated in a Young Offenders Institute, he found himself in the company of people who'd been involved in the 2011 riots in England, in London. And they, of course, had also been locked up in some cases for inciting violence using Facebook, using social media. So the idea that it's something that was unique or something that only came into being during the Farage riots or in the aftermath of the Farage riots this summer is another lie, is another load of nonsense, because in the 2011 riots in cities and towns across England, people who were convicted of inciting some of the looting and arson and other violence that we saw in various locales were also jailed despite not having contributed to the violence themselves. So I think probably the biggest lie of the last 12 months or so is this notion of two-tier policing, which reminds me, I've actually got a missed information for you on precisely that subject. But I said I wanted to do a story that constitutes the much shallower end of the news, and you'll understand why. Did I answer the question on the missing word round? I did, didn't I? Yeah. And I will, because this is a topic that I don't know that anyone else would be childish enough to share with you. For reasons that will shortly become clear, I want to know why or what or whether. I want to know who's been attacked by the most exotic animal. All right? And I'm going to do two categories. I'm going to do domestic and I'm going to do international. These stories come around occasionally, don't they? And what I love about this is that they have established it using doorbell camera footage. If the online team are worth their onions, there will be doorbell camera footage of the story I'm about to relate to you at lbc.co.uk by 12:30 today, if indeed it exists, if it's not already there. A bird of prey has attacked about a dozen people in a quiet Hertfordshire village, with doorbell camera footage showing the moment the hawk swooped on a man. I could go a little bit David Attenborough at this point. Residents of Flamstead have said that the bird, thought to be a Harris's hawk, has swooped on several residents in the past week after it was first spotted about a month ago. The hawk apparently has a penchant for tall men. It attacks from behind. What's the accent in Flamstead, Keith? Do we know? Where is Flamstead? Shall I do an accent? Is it quite similar to an American accent, as deployed by someone who's lived in several states and likes a beer? Oh, that's a relief. It attacks from behind, and you're surprised. No, I'll stop now. It attacks from behind. They think it's escaped from Whipsnade Zoo, so it must be in Kent. It attacks from behind, and you're surprised. You suddenly get a whack on the head. A number of people get their head cut. Yeah, well, I've got sympathy for people who've got their head cut. Someone working in my garden, he added, got attacked twice. And another friend of mine got cut on the head. I feel it should have a rural accent, this story, don't you? It should have a sort of touch of the Percy Throwers. A friend of mine got cut on the head, he did. It's moving around the village. A spokesman for the zoo added, birds of prey are not actively hostile towards humans, but may attack if provoked, or if they feel threatened if a person gets too close. So look, the moral of the story is don't go anywhere near hawks or eagles or any other bird of prey. Saw a buzzard at the weekend in Norfolk. Nice, really distinctive markings. I got a golden plover, load of oyster catchers, and a buzzard. That was my little spot. I want to know who listening to this programme now. Claire is asking, James, have you got a concussion again? No, this is what we call a light-hearted inquiry into shared human experiences, Claire. I think Darren is disqualified from this one because he used to be a zookeeper. He says, when I was a zookeeper, that's how I know, I was attacked by all sorts of things. Does professionally count, or do you mean wild animals? I think that counts. Do you think that counts? It's up to you, Darren. You ring us with the story. We'll decide whether it counts or not. I have been not attacked, but targeted by an elephant. Did you know this? I was in Sri Lanka and I went on a safari, saw a leopard. That was exciting. I went on a safari and I was sitting in the Jeep eating my sandwiches when the guide suddenly started hollering. It's the only word I can use. I don't think I've ever used that word before. The guide started hollering and smashing the side of the Jeep and sped off. And I, just as I looked around, an elephant, a quite heavily betusked elephant, was right next to the window of the Jeep, and the guide had obviously just not paid attention. He'd obviously not nodded off as such, because we'd have noticed that, but he'd obviously been a little bit distracted. And apparently, had the elephant so chosen to reach into the Jeep in pursuit of my I'm getting more messages about where Whipsnade Zoo actually is than anything else this morning. And that's good. That's fine. You carry on. If the elephant had actually reached into the... So I got back to the hotel and I was telling the fellow that owned the hotel what had happened, thinking it was quite a funny story, and he went a bit white. He wasn't a Sri Lankan gentleman. He was a former trader from Goldman Sachs, actually, who bought a hotel after the tsunami. Lovely bloke. And I'm telling him the story, and he went a bit white. And I said, "What?" And he goes, "That's really dangerous." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, if the elephant had tried to reach into he could have tossed the truck over without even noticing. If he fancied it, he would have been able to if he'd reached in after my sandwiches, he'd have been able to toss the Jeep upside down. You could have. I mean, it was not necessarily a targeting. He was more interested in my sandwiches than in me. But I think I'm going to go in early with the elephant. If you are in the Flamstead area of the country, you may well have been attacked recently by a Harris's hawk. But somebody listening to this programme, we're only taking this up to 12:30. Somebody listening to this programme will have been hurt or targeted or attacked. It doesn't have to be vicious. It could have been accidental. I've got one here that counts as accidental. David tells me that as a child, I was stepped on by a giraffe. That works. Who has had an unpleasant encounter with the most exotic animal? Right? Now, don't hang me out to dry on this one, all right? You need to play, otherwise I'll just have to tell you more slightly mediocre anecdotes from my own miserable existence. Who has had an unfortunate encounter with the most exotic animal? Or unexpected? It doesn't have to be exotic, it could be unexpected. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Who has had the most unfortunate encounter with the most unexpected animal? So it's two uns, unexpected and unfortunate, but not necessarily exotic. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. That's what I want to know. Arctic terns, they would count. But I mean, in many ways, as a professional anecdotalist, there are two elements, there are two variables in this story. So it's not just the species and the unexpected exoticness of the species that counts. It's also the nature of the encounter. So, being attacked by a relatively unexotic animal in a very unexpected way would also work as well. If, for example, you needed stitches after an encounter with a chinchilla, that might work. But it's probably not going to go as far as the time that someone got attacked. We just want to speak to someone who's been attacked by a lion, don't we? Have you ever been attacked by a lion? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Let's find out if you've got the first idea what I'm talking about. You've got the rough idea of what the topic is. It's only taking us up to 12:30. The phone lines are open. My work here is done.
James O'Brien on LBC.
There's a lot coming in, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be able to keep up. I was stalked by a pufferfish in Barbados. I swam for miles and it was right there taunting me the whole time, says Holly. I don't know. Can I read this one out, Keith? It's just a normal word. It's a biological. This is from JD. True story. I was bitten on the penis by an ant, a red ant. Although you spelt it aren't, JD. I'm hoping that you is a mistake, mate. Otherwise, we've got all sorts of issues going on here. And on it goes. I mean, I'm honestly, a monkey in Gibraltar stole my cousin's ice cream by landing on her back and wrestling it off her. And yeah, that's not abnormal, though, is it? You see those sort of stuff all the time if your algorithms are tuned correctly on social media. Let's find out what's happening on the phones. Eloise, I can't remember how I phrased the topic, but you'll be able to work it out from the quality of contribution. Eloise is in Nottingham. We've had 2 Eloises today.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, not the other one in Nottingham as well, then.
I don't think so, but we have had calls from Nottingham as well today, so it's some sort of small world business going on. What have you got for me, Eloise?
All right, well, not a lion attack, but when I was 3 years old, we went on holiday to Tenerife. We went to a nature sanctuary.
Yeah.
And my dad and my younger brother, who was just a baby at the time, went round one side of the lake. Me and my mum went the other way, and I was attacked by a male peacock in heat.
Male peacocks can't be in heat. He might have been horny. But I mean, you need to be a female to be only a peahen.
Sorry, I do mean a female. It was the white peacock.
So not the one with the big tail.
No,
the
sorry.
peahen.
The white peacock.
The peahen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So my mum looked away for one moment, heard me screaming, and essentially this peacock just came out of nowhere, pinned me down, and actually put its claw into my eye socket to try and rip my eyes out.
Really?
Yes, yeah. Luckily, well, at the time, obviously it was awful. I was covered in blood. It was scratching to basically go for my eyes.
Is that a deliberate thing? I don't suppose there are any experts on peahen attacks, but would it be because I'm just thinking peacocks have eyes on their tails, don't they? I don't know if that's relevant. Have you ever thought of that before?
No, I hadn't put that connection together.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
I think I probably just got too close to it.
Yes, but why your eyes?
I don't know, but that's what they went for. And I remember at the time, because I was only about 3.5. Yeah. But I remember we had to flag down a taxi. The driver didn't want to pick us up because there was too much blood, and he didn't want to get it on the seats. But luckily, I only. Yeah.
Right, top of the list. Well, you're winning so far, albeit you are the only entrant. We like that. Have you any scars? Any permanent scarring?
No permanent scars.
Oh, extra points. Extra points for permanent scar. Extra points for permanent scar. And have you been traumatised by peahens subsequently?
I was scared of birds for a long time.
All birds.
All birds. I still cross away if I see a swan or a goose on the canals.
Fair enough. No, fair. So mild trauma. That gets you 2 points. Thank you, Eloise. Johnny's in Crowborough. Johnny, what happened?
So this is a few years ago on holiday in Sulawesi in Indonesia.
Oh, yeah.
We were up in the rainforest and we were offered a chance to go and see orangutans in the wild.
Oh, yes.
And we had a guide who brought bananas with him and we sort of traipsed around, and there was one particular one that moved with quite a sort of alarming speed when it saw us. And our guide, who could barely speak English, clearly started panicking. Told us to run, and we ran, and when he ran out of bananas to give to the throwing back the orangutan, he then.
Were you throwing bananas over your shoulder as you ran?
Yeah, and we ran out, and once he'd run out, he veered off course and ran off in his own direction and left us and just told us to keep running.
Oh, really?
And yeah, what felt like a lifetime, but we found out later. I mean, they said that had it caught us, it would have been a rather vicious attack.
It could have beaten your brains out with your own arm.
Something like
Can't
that,
be messing with an orangutan. And so, so this was known, this orangutan.
We discovered after. I mean, we kind of sensed something wasn't quite right.
Well, no, that goes ahead of peahen, doesn't it? By anybody's standards, it's got to take. It moves into the lead. Any permanent trauma? Are you all right with monkeys?
Well, I
apes,
thought about
simians?
it just now. I mean, I get attacked. I'm a postman, so I regularly get attacked by dogs and the odd peacock and stuff. But no,
good preparation.
I'm sort of over it.
Good preparation, really. Well, sort of pet orangutan, right? And so no trauma, no scars.
Well, there hadn't been until you brought it all up now.
Well, I should have done a trigger. I should have done a trigger warning on this, shouldn't I? Thank you, Johnny. Johnny is winning with the orangutan. It is 22 minutes after 12. V is in Horsham. V, what have you got?
Hi, James. Well, a few things happened on a trip when I was 19 in Zimbabwe, where I'm from.
Yeah.
A few of us, we started off whitewater rafting at the Victoria Falls.
Oh, wow.
And now, if you don't see crocodiles, it means they're in the water because they hear you coming for miles down the river.
Right.
But there was a big boy sunning himself up on a rock that I was aware of, and he was huge, and he didn't hide. But so we were rafting, and I'm aware of this guy. We turned a corner, hit some rocks, and our raft went over. And the first thing I did when I came up out of the water was look back to see if he was still on the rock. No, he was straight away in the water and coming for us. We turned that raft over so fast. Anyway, from whitewater rafting, we then went canoeing down the Zambezi River for a few days and camped down there. And my friend and I, we couldn't get our act together, and we were actually going backwards in our canoe at the time. And we passed an area where two male hippos were having a face-off. Yeah. And the bull had come to challenge the other bull for his pack, his herd. And anyway, the resident bull was ousted from his herd, and he came, and he was angry, and he just came charging towards us in the canoe. We were going backwards, and just gently down with the current, and I thought, well, this is it, our life is over, because a friend of mine got snapped in half. He just got snapped in half by a hippo, and he just
a friend of yours got snapped in half by a hippo.
Yeah, he thought he swam out onto Lake Malawi, and he thought it was a rock, and this hippo just turned around and literally just snapped him off. Anyway, this hippo, about 2 meters away, he came up out of the water and went like this. I could see the
whites of his eyes. The whites of his eyes.
On his teeth.
Yeah.
I could have picked his teeth. Anyway, so then on the second night, I think it was, so we slept under the stars, and there was one of us that was armed. But so we had a little campfire, and we heard lions, and there was a herd of lions, and we could hear their tummies rumbling.
That's how close they were. What were you armed with?
Just one person had a pistol.
Okay.
That was it.
Right.
And a whole pack of lions circled us. They
really?
Circled us.
It's a pride. It's a pride, V. It's a pride. It's a pride. Words matter. A pride of lions.
They do matter. But, you forget things. I heard a joke the other day that women are having babies later and later in life, and there was a lady in County Down in Ireland, and she had a baby, and she was in her 60s, and her friend came to the hospital and said, "I'm here to see the baby," and she said, "Well, you're going to have to wait until he cries," and she says, "Why is that?" She says, "Because I forgot where I put him." But anyway,
you're covering a lot of ground here, V. I think I'm glad you didn't open with the Irish joke. I'm glad I'd have opened exactly as you did, but you weren't actually, just to be clear, and short answers only, you weren't actually attacked by any of these creatures. You think that the crocodile was stalking you, the hippo kind of just a coincidence, and the lions moved on.
They circled us.
They circled by lions. See, this is tricky now, because the peahen was actually an attack and the orangutan was not, and now being circled by lions at night in the in the mighty jungle. Except they weren't sleeping. They were circling. I think that's probably in the lead. The circling of the lions. Janie is in Sheringham. Janie, what have you got?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Janie.
Yes, many years ago I lived and worked in Italy for quite a long time.
Yes.
I had an Italian boyfriend. We were off at weekends, and we went down to the coast. We took a boat trip to a cove where you can only get there by boat. My then partner spoke to the driver of the boat and said, "Look, can you leave us here and then come back in the morning?" Great idea, beautiful weather. The boat went. We're in this cove. There's no roads, just a sheer cliff. We built a fire. We had some fish with us. We grilled the fish. We went swimming. Then we went to bed.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all I can describe it sounded like. It sounded like hooves, and then that kind of sound.
Oh, it's Bina going round booths earlier when I was describing how my hair made me look like Hitler, Giva Hofstad and Derek out of the Ricky Gervais series. She started snorting like a pig. So you've built this up, and I let you build it up. No, I know what it is, and I'm not very impressed, frankly.
Well, you should be, because my Italian was quite good, but not that good. So in the middle of the night, my Italian boyfriend is screaming, "Cinghiale, cinghiale." And I'm thinking, cinghiale, and we're running around the sand in the dark, being chased by something. He had the presence of mind to grab a bit of wood from the fire, and there were wild boar, but not just, there was mummy, daddy, and the babies.
It's not a lion, is it? It's not even a pig.
But they had tusks and things.
Did they attack you? Did they actually catch you?
They were charging at us.
That's not what I asked. Did they catch you?
They didn't catch me.
See, I've had a wild boar encounter.
Have you had a family of wild boar encounters, James?
I think they're almost always travelling as a family.
Okay.
So, don't sound like that. You sounded like I've spoilt your fun now. But I don't think in the great scheme of things, it's that shocking. So, like, if the place I go to in Greece, quite often the wild boars come in from the woods to go rooting through the local rubbish.
Yeah, I think, James, when you're lying on the beach and it's pitch black and there's no road and all you can do is... But
it's a wild boar. The last caller was surrounded by lions. Literally, the caller before you was lying on a bit of outdoor land with a fire, and a pride of lions started circling her.
So the exciting outcome of this, James...
Go on. Is that now he's your husband?
Here we go. We had to... we had to climb up the cliff.
Okay, it's getting better.
And we stood on the ledge for the whole night until the boat came back the next day.
Wow. So the boars, yes. I mean, so the boars, did the boars go? Did they dissipate?
They were basically after the fish bones and stuff from...
Of course they were. You wouldn't risk it again. What's the wildest animal in Sheringham?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm right near to Hickling Broad at the moment. So it's the
seals then?
So, yeah, probably the seals at Horsey.
Or what's it? Flipping out. What is it? The Stookie? No. Blakeney. Blakeney's good for seals.
Blakeney and Horsey. Winterton's beautiful as well. But round the Broad, we're soon going to have the swallowtail butterflies, which we're looking forward to.
Any minute now. Loving it. Thank you. 12:30 is the time. I mean, inevitably, my phones are ringing off the hook, but... apparently boars do eat humans, Gemma tells me, but what qualifications has she got? Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Not a jingle, a sting. We need a sting for this, don't we? It's not going away. Don't shake your heads at me just because I'm asking you to do some work. It's not going away, is it? Have you ever had a sting, Natasha Clark, since becoming LBC's political editor?
No, I haven't, but I did have a promo the other day and I was really excited to hear it. Thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciated it.
If we were to have a sting or a jingle for the ongoing...
Reform rows.
Reformanigans. It doesn't quite work. Keith, any thoughts on this? Eleanor doesn't think we need one. She's actually written on my screen in capital letters like Donald Trump. We don't need a jingle for everything.
No, we don't need one, but it would be lovely to have one.
Don't need a jingle for anything, technically, Eleanor, do we?
I just think
we like them.
Sometimes lifts the audio a little bit.
I agree. Breaks things up, light and shade. Which reminds me, I've got a missed information, not now, but before the end of this section, I've got quite a good missed information. So the reform something, there's a good word, someone will come up with it in a minute. Reform what? What would be a good name to describe the internecine warfare? And don't text me saying internecine warfare, that always breaks out in parties or organisations that Nigel Farage is at the head of. What's the latest, Natasha? We could call it that.
What's the latest, Natasha? That's true. That could apply to all shows.
Of course.
Could go across the entire station.
Yeah.
So in the last few minutes or so, a spokesperson from the Met Police has said that they've now launched an investigation into an allegation of a series of verbal threats made by a 67-year-old man, which we understand is Rupert Lowe. They said our original statement referred to alleged threats made in December last year. We'd like to clarify that when this matter was reported to us, it was referred to a series of alleged threats made between December 2024 and February 2025, and further inquiries are ongoing at this stage. Now, last Friday, the Met said they were assessing all of the information. No investigation had then been launched, but it looks like that's been developed today with the Met saying that they are investigating a series of alleged threats. And this all goes to the heart of this row, this he said row, isn't it, between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, the politician formerly of the Reform Party, now has had the whip suspended, who it is alleged has done so after having a spectacular fallout with Nigel Farage.
Highs and lows?
Of Rupert Lowe's short career at Reform.
As a name? Highs and lows? Reform regurgitations? Needs work. Reform wrangling? Reformatted?
Reform wranglings works on a sort of different basis, doesn't it?
So Marcus reformers, you need to be familiar with the old cartoon Transformers. Do you remember that? Transformers, robots in disguise. Mark's written reformers, fascists in disguise, which I was good that because I could hear the music even without you telling me where it was. So what happens next? Not a lot, presumably, if the police are involved. I mean, is there not a case? Because every time complaints are made, the police have a requirement. There was a story, I nearly did a missed information on it a couple of weeks ago about a woman who'd posted something about a local councillor, and because the councillor complained, the police are required to come to your house and tell you that someone has complained, even as they tell you in the same breath, you are not going to be arrested, there is no prospect whatsoever of you getting into trouble. But of course it gets put through the mangle of dishonest right-wing media, and it's an appalling assault. You can't even post about what an awful councillor you've got anymore without getting arrested. Do the police, are they not required to investigate certain types of complaints?
Yeah, so it's sort of like a pre-investigation is what we understood it to be, where they've obviously been handed a dossier of information by the Reform Party, and now they are saying that there has been a string of verbal threats that have been made that they are making further inquiries on. The Met, I should say, have not said they have launched an investigation, but we have asked them for clarification about whether they have a specific investigation on the way. But Mr. Rupert Lowe has been speaking in an interview of which was 50 minutes long. 5-0, and I watched all of it for you.
Fishes. Why?
So honestly, it was quite a lot about German debates and very, very boring things. But in that, he did suggest that he might join the Conservative Party if the Reform Party doesn't want him anymore, which would be quite something, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
He said he hasn't spoken to Kemi Badenoch about that, and I'm sure that would be absolutely music to her ears to have a Reform defection the other way for once. But yeah, I could see it happening.
And on it goes. No word from Uncle Nige.
No, I haven't checked his social media account, but last time I checked it, he hadn't specifically made any comments about these allegations. However, we have had something just in the inbox, not from Nigel Farage, but from YouGov in the last few minutes. A third of Reform UK voters feel the party would be doing better under a new leader, according to new polling. A third of Reform UK voters, that's 33%, believe the party would be doing better under someone different to Nigel Farage. A fifth think Reform would be doing a lot better with a different leader. So that'd be interesting. Who should lead next?
And that ticker tape they do of membership has actually started ticking down.
It has, according to one report. Exactly. So I think they believed to be over 100,000 members, and they really celebrated that at the time. They thought that was going to be beating
it still
the Conservatives.
Might, a week is a long time in politics. What do you think, I mean, to be briefly and mildly serious, what do you think's hurting him most? Claiming that he's part of the same phenomenon as the alleged sex trafficker and rapist Andrew Tate, who, of course, is being cited in court today in the case of a man who raped and murdered his girlfriend and then killed her mother and sister, and was found to be a big Andrew Tate fan, and indeed looking up Andrew Tate material the night before the murders. So is it the fact that Farage thinks he's part of the same phenomenon as the alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate? Is it the fact that he considers Vladimir Putin to be the most admirable politician in the world? Is it the fact that he essentially parroted Kremlin propaganda when Russia went into Crimea originally and had another crack at it when Russia illegally invaded Ukraine? Is it that Donald Trump's true colours have finally emerged?
You haven't mentioned the Chagos Islands and his embarrassment over that.
Well, he insisted that Trump was never going to do the thing that Starmer would. So yes, that. So which of these do you think is the reason for or is he not racist enough anymore for the Reform following?
None of the above. I think there's a Zelensky comments, the one that he made on LBC last week. Genuinely, I think that's probably damaged him more than any of those. I think Andrew Tate, you're completely right. He did get a lot of pushback, including from one caller when he spoke to LBC about this last week. But I do think the Zelensky comments, the one when he was the only real.
He should have worn a suit and sort of.
The only real Western leader to criticise Zelensky in that way and to say that, he wasn't prepared for this meeting and various other criticisms. I think he's been really the only Western leader to have done so. I genuinely think that politicians across all
pushing it
the
a bit,
chamber
calling
really
him a Western leader. Technically, he lives in the West and he leads a little ragtag bunch of... How many are left in the political party?
It's only 4 now. They've lost 20% of their MPs
So we run through it again. One of them has been jailed for beating up his ex-girlfriend. One of them has been ordered to apologise to staff in the House of Commons for treating them appallingly, telling them to F off and the likes of it, while also, of course, being a great champion of ordinary working people, because apparently the member of staff in the House of Commons didn't hold the door open for 30p Lee Anderson. So 'tis he. I can't remember the name. Murdoch is the fellow who...
James McMurdo is the first person you're referring
to. Farage is the Andrew Tate fan who thinks they're part of the same phenomenon.
He would say, he hasn't said he's a fan of Andrew Tate, I'm sure.
Okay.
I think he said something like, I can see why he's become popular.
He's been photographed with him doing a big cheesy grin with his thumbs up.
Well,
so that counts. Normally the behaviour of a fan. Everyone who's been photographed with me doing a big cheesy grin with their thumbs up would, I think, describe themselves as a fan. But you're right.
I told you about that time.
Details matter. Hang on, I haven't finished.
Oh, sorry.
And Richard Tice is the one whose girlfriend is an economic migrant.
Yeah. That's right.
Just keeping tabs.
Okay.
Go on, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, there was that picture. Do you remember that time I showed you that photograph of that person that came up on my dating profile with a picture, standing next to a picture with you? And you said, "Oh, who's this?"
Yeah.
You don't remember that?
And you're engaged now, I think.
Yeah, exactly. We're very happy together. We're very happy together now. Yeah. No, I have to say
that work?
No, it didn't. It didn't work. It actually put me off, that guy.
Yeah, you. Oh. But would it work in the broader pool of dating when someone is associating themselves so obviously with me? It cuts out a lot of small talk. You know where we stand politically.
Exactly.
We're on the same side.
I didn't need to see whether they were part of the left or the right. I knew exactly where they stood politically. But no, we didn't go out, I'm afraid. So I have no more for you there.
Oh, what a shame. Reform Storm.
Oh, I like that.
Reform. There's something about the rhyme between reform and storm. We could, Keith, we could have like some weather.
Thunderstorm.
We could have some weather. Reform storm.
That might scare the dogs, though. They're quite upset.
True.
It's thunderstorm.
Do you think it's going to die down for a bit now?
No, I don't think so, because as long as Rupert Lowe continues to speak to the media, and he seems to be tweeting it, or Xing rather, at every single opportunity.
It's back up, is it? Because it was down for most of yesterday.
Well, the last time I checked it, he has been firing off a string of social media messages. But yeah, obviously it's now for the Met Police to investigate, but also for the House of Commons as well to investigate whether any of these things has brought the party or the House into disrepute, and whether he might face sanctions there too.
And no word on why it took the chairman of the party that is usually very strong on the subject of free speech and describes an awful lot of things that other people find offensive as hearty words. No word on why it took them 3 months to report these hearty words.
I don't know when these were first reported to police. Okay. I'm not sure when that was. Reform sources say that was a couple of weeks ago. But yes, it does appear to have happened in tandem with all of these events, including that Daily Mail article where he was quite harsh about Nigel Farage. So I don't think there's a complete coincidence here in this timeline. Reform in a teacup? Ooh. I think we're stretching now. Well, I prefer Reform Storm. I think we're reaching. But you get the ultimate. I think we're reaching. Have you ever been attacked by an unexpectedly exotic animal? Unexpectedly exotic? Don't think so. Okay. I was attacked by a dog when I was young, but that's just quite normal, isn't it? Yeah, that's dog bites man or woman. That's not. We're looking really for. So. Okay. And I'm just going to think now about the one that got away. It could have, it could have been Mr. Clark. I'll find it. I'll find the guy for you if you like. No, that poor fellow is probably feeling slightly. If you'd like to call in, there's probably loads of them. Let's not mess about. It's probably dating sites are probably full of people who think that holding a picture of me next to them. So book. That was the only one. Well, the only one you came across. You've obviously been swiping in the wrong direction. It's 1:45. James O'Brien on LBC. 47 is the time. Another one, I think, for Racists' Corner rather than Idiots' Corner. James, you small... This is brilliant, this. It's almost like a poem. James, you small, sad little man, thinking it's Andrew Tate's fault for speaking about stuff, not his fault if people do bad crimes, you far-left, ultra, self-hating bigot with small man syndrome. You can't have small man syndrome if you're 6 foot, can you? So that's Idiots' Corner and Racists' Corner. Or can you? I don't know. Yeah, I am. Yeah, 185. I just stoop a bit. And of course, there's another person who thinks you can only be radicalised online into committing murder if you're brown. So I think you're not supposed to advertise your bigotries and prejudices in this way, but at least you didn't sign it, eh? Thank goodness there's no button I can press to see your history of sending messages into LBC and identify exactly who you are. 12:48 is the time. This is a bit embarrassing.
we're in the middle of a phone-in about coming under unexpected attack from surprisingly exotic animals. And I've got the former deputy director of the IMF on hold to talk to me about the economic situation in the United States of America. But I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that he's got absolutely no idea what conversation it is that he is now going to be interrupting. So I'm going to pretend we're doing something really... Oh, yes, well, of course, that is what happens, isn't it, when, as Socrates reminded us, that is what happens when human frailty is on display for all the world to see. We turn our attention next to the economic situation in the United States, and it's a headline from the Daily Telegraph, really, that sums things up most neatly. Wall Street plummets as US recession fears mount. And as Donald Trump and his acolytes successfully flood the zone with so much madness that it's hard to know which bits we should be gripping and which bits we should be focusing on, my job at this time is to take a view on the stuff that really does deserve further examination and really doesn't get filed under distraction tactics. Mohamed El-Erian is a chief economic advisor at Allianz and a former deputy director of the IMF, now president of Queen's College, Cambridge, and he joins me now. I mean, that's a pretty arresting headline, Mohamed. Wall Street plummets as US recession fears mount. I saw another story this morning on Bloomberg that if you were to focus exclusively on the billionaires who were sitting in the row behind Donald Trump at his inauguration, just that small cabal of billionaires, they have lost $209 billion collectively in the same time frame. How big a deal is it?
It's a big deal for the US because the narrative has changed completely. A few months ago, James, everybody was talking about US economic exceptionalism, this notion that the US was a juggernaut and nothing could stop it and it would outperform all other countries. Now, as you pointed out, people are worried about recession. So it's been a dramatic change, and it has to do with policy uncertainty. There's growing evidence of businesses stepping back and not investing because they don't understand their operating environment. And there's growing evidence of people spending less because they're worried about their income going forward.
And one of the most obvious examples of this would be the sort of hokey cokey of tariffs. You know, he puts his left leg in, he takes his left leg out, in, out, shake it all about, and you don't even know in some sectors or in some countries whether a tariff has been applied or not.
Yes, I mean, a CEO told me the other day, I just want to know what my operating environment looks like. Will I have tariffs? Will I not have tariffs? I just need to be able to know this in order to make decisions. And if I don't know it, I'm going to postpone my decisions.
Does anybody profit from this sort of chaos? I suppose some traders will, won't they? They'll have gambled on the dips that we saw in the markets yesterday and turned a profit accordingly.
Yes, I suspect, and we'll see these numbers. I mean, the people who get hurt, as usual, are the small investors. And then there is the risk of the economy. You know, the one weakness of U.S. economic exceptionalism was that it didn't include the lower income households. They were in terrible shape. They've spent all their pandemic savings. They've run down the ability to borrow. Their credit cards are maxed out, and they are really suffering. So the last thing they need is to lose income and to have fewer jobs.
And they were most susceptible to the sort of unspecified promises of jam tomorrow that Donald Trump made during his campaign, the sort of broad brushstroke pledges to improve your life and make you richer, claiming, I think, when Joe Biden was in the White House, that a good performance of the stock market was somehow down to him, whereas now he's in the White House. I imagine at some point today he'll probably blame the bad performance of the stock market on his predecessor.
Yeah, I mean, people are surprised that he, instead of talking the market up, which he did in his first term, he's actually come out and with his other senior officials said this is a period of detox. We can absorb the little disturbances, bumps along the way. So their narrative is also changing. I think they realize that there isn't much they can do right now unless they want to provide clarity. And as some people say, unpredictability is not a bug, it's a feature.
And what they say when they mean that is that it's deliberate.
Correct, that it puts everybody in a situation where they're totally unbalanced and you keep them guessing. But that's not a way to run a country. I mean, you can do it initially and you can score wins initially. But if you do it continuously, people disengage.
I mean, I think, I don't know whether it's more your field than or mine, actually, but the dangers of thinking that we can apply rational analysis. I've almost got a mantra now of pointing out that the tools we normally use, whether you're a political commentator or an economic advisor, an economic analyst, the tools that we normally use are largely useless when it comes to Donald Trump. Are we looking for rhyme and reason where there simply may not be any?
So you're right. I'll give you an example. Trade is inherently a cooperative game. If you and I trade, it's because we understand that we'll both benefit. If we suddenly turn it into something uncooperative and I start threatening you and bullying you, yes, I'll win in the short term, but you will simply disengage from me. That's not the way trade is supposed to be conducted. And I think we're starting to see this in many areas of the U.S. economy. Look, it's still retrievable. Nothing has fundamentally been broken, but you don't want to continue in this paradigm for too long.
And in the context of recession, what would we be looking for next? What would we be looking for as good news or bad news in that context?
So first, my own probability of a recession for the US is somewhere between 25 to 30%.
Okay.
So it's not over 50%, but it's above the 10% it was at the beginning of the year. What you need to look for is whether companies continue to go to the sideline and say, this is too complicated. I don't understand it. I'm just going to wait because I don't want to make a big mistake.
And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I don't quite see what resolution looks like, except a return to the sort of normality that Donald Trump's entire shtick historically is a rejection of. I mean, if there isn't chaos, if there isn't disruption, there's no Trump.
So his view is this is simply a little bit of pain because he is taking the U.S. economy to a place where it will trade in a fairer global system, that the U.S. will be respected and treated properly, to a place where the government becomes more efficient,
right,
to a place where fiscal dominance, as the economists call it, is less acute. That's how he sees it. But you and I know that you may have a destination, but if the journey there is too bumpy, your destination is not guaranteed.
Final question: does anyone agree with him?
Yes, there's quite a few.
Objective, independent analysts, not just Marco Rubio.
No, I mean, there's a few economists.
There are.
It'll bring you back to the supply side revolution that the UK went through, that believed that all problems come down to a government that's too big. And if you simply take a hammer to it and just destroy
a chainsaw, Mohamed, a chainsaw.
A chainsaw, thank you. I was trying to avoid that image.
Very wise. So he's not, so he's not without support, but for the rest of us, it's a rather pessimistic watching brief. Thank you, Mohamed El-Erian. As I say, former Deputy Director of the IMF, now President of Queen's College, Cambridge. We've got a little clip of the fellow who is responsible for the chainsaw metaphor. It's not even a metaphor. I mean, it's a metaphor in the context of government cuts. Are we going to have a listen to that or not? The Elon Musk stuff. Milei gave the chainsaw to Musk, and Musk waved it around on the stage. So Musk is the one charged with reducing all the government spending. I wonder how he thinks it's going.
You're hearing a call to action.
Yeah.
You giving up your other stuff? I mean, how are you running your other businesses?
With great difficulty. Yeah, I mean...
But there's no turning back, you're saying?
I'm just here trying to make government more efficient, eliminate waste and fraud, and so far we're making good progress.
Called a military hero a traitor yesterday and described one of the most respected politicians in the European firmament, Radek Sikorski, the Polish politician, as a small man. So that, but I've said to you before, it's as if the people that send me unhinged texts have now actually taken over the world. I literally got called that, didn't I, 5 minutes ago by a mad texter who can't hear me now because I've locked him in racist corner. But there's Elon Musk deploying precisely the same sparkling rhetoric. If you missed any of today's show, do you think I got away with it with the IMF bloke? I don't think he knew we were talking about exotic animal attacks just before we came to him, did we? I did. I think I got away with that. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Play, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, which contains the best bits of this show in a 60-minute package every single day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4, but now on LBC, it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.